staff. We are very appreciative for all of your work in bringing this to the public. And go ahead and advance to the next slide, Annie. I'll also introduce Annie Schultz. She's in the background today, all day with us. She'll be running the slides and making sure that we stay on topic here. And so thank you, Annie, for your work on this. So today, what you can look forward to, our topics today, we are going to continue to focus on the benefits of well-being and wellness in your life, all the way from physical to medical perspective of why it's important. And then we're going to be moving into cognitive health and mental wellness, well-being from that social perspective, really digging into what cognitive health means to the whole picture of happiness for you, your loved ones, and everyone that's participating and watching today. We'll start off the day, just a little preview of what we're going to be doing. Dr. Tipton will be joining us and wrapping up his 3-part series on the medical perspective of the benefits of exercise in Parkinson's disease. Dr. Tipton, I'll go through the bios now so that we don't have to do that in between. So Dr. Tipton is an assistant professor of neurology and movement disorders. He's a fellow at Mayo Clinic here in Rochester. Dr. Tipton graduated summa cum laude from the University of Tennessee with an honors degree in biochemistry, cellular, and molecular biology. Following graduation, Dr. Tipton was a post-baccalaureate fellow at the National Institutes of Health and received his medical degree from East Tennessee State University. He completed a neurology residency at the Mayo Clinic in Florida. There, he served as the chief resident. After residency, he completed a behavioral neurology fellowship at Mayo Clinic, Florida, before beginning his current fellowship here at the Mayo Clinic and the Movement Disorders Clinic. His major interest is neurodegenerative diseases. So really focuses on Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and those associated with that. And he's also the creator and co-host of Long Live the Brains, and I hope he tells you a little bit about that today. It's a podcast and YouTube channel intended to entertain and educate listeners about all things pertaining to neurodegenerative disease. So I recommend that you join and like that podcast and YouTube channel. Outside of medicine, Dr. Tipton is a husband, father, and avid St. Louis Cardinals and Green Bay Packers fan. Then we'll move into having Dr. Rio Bentley from our ExercisAbilities team present to you on safe walking success and using the best mobility aids. And Rio Bentley joins us as a neurology specialist here at ExercisAbilities. She graduated from the Mayo Clinic School of Health Sciences in 2017 with her doctorate degree in physical therapy. Prior to this, she attended California State University, Fresno, and earned a bachelor degree of science in kinesiology and exercise science. Dr. Rio has focused her treatment specialty on work with adults in neurologic recovery. Following Dr. Bentley, we will move on to hearing from Zach Curry, our certified personal trainer and certified lifestyle coach here at ExercisAbilities. He's going to work on staying flexible through the years, a really important thing here when you're dealing with Parkinson's disease and traveling your journey. Zach is a certified personal trainer and group fitness instructor. In 2015, Zach received training from the NRN, which is the Neuro Recovery Network, on activity-based exercise in neurologic recovery. Zach is passionate about helping those with injuries meet their goals and recover movement through their lifespan. Zach leads our Parkinson's Power Program, and we'll talk about that towards the end, but with the recovery of COVID, we hope to get back to our group classes that we have here at ExercisAbilities, and that does include Power, which we've talked about in previous workshops. Power is a wellness program that focuses on big movements, and it's research-based, evidence-based, that it helps with helping to ease the symptoms of Parkinson's, those physical symptoms especially, but also all of the symptoms, including the cognitive health. Our Power program, it will here at ExercisAbilities, but also it is available throughout the nation at locations. And so if you're joining us not from Rochester, from across the nation, we welcome you to try to look up and find PWR ! And see if there's a provider nearby to you. Following Zach, we will be hearing from Julie Fields. She's joining us for the first time. She is working with the Mayo Clinic Division of Neurocognitive Disorders. Julie joins us as a board-certified clinical neuropsychologist who practices at Mayo Clinic here in Rochester. She completed her undergraduate degree at the University of Kansas in Loris, Kansas. Her graduate degree at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, Texas, and her fellowship was in neuropsychology here at the Mayo Clinic. Currently, she dedicates half her time to clinical care, evaluating adults with a wide range of neurologic disorders. Her emphasis is on older adults, from the worried well to mild cognitive impairments to dementia. In her role, she assesses cognition and works with referring providers to help determine diagnoses and plan patients' paths going forward. We're really excited to have Julie join us to bring that perspective to our workshop. Following her, we'll have Holly Brown joining us again, her third time with us, and she's going to be having some crucial conversations, a family meeting. Really excited about what Holly brings from that perspective of the caregiver health and well-being as support to working with those loved ones with Parkinson's disease. And then after that, Zach's going to be joining us again around that lunchtime. We welcome you to grab your lunch during that time, get up, move around, and then listen to Zach talk about some nutritional aspects that are important in Parkinson's disease care. And then we're going to, at 12:30 to 1:15, we want to hear from you. We want to open it up to a roundtable discussion with the experts. We're going to use the questions and answers and conversation as we go this morning to help guide that roundtable. And it's really for you. We really want to open up the experts to you, have time to ask your crucial questions. It can be about what we talk about today, or it can be about any topic in Parkinson's disease. We really have a wide variety of experts here at your disposal to ask those questions to. And so we really strongly encourage you to, throughout the day, we'll go over that here in a minute, but throughout the day, to add to the questions and answers section so that we can address it through the day, but also utilize that at the end for some really great conversation. And again, we're going to open up the mics then too. So we really welcome you to bring your questions to that roundtable discussion. All right, you can go on to the next slide, Annie. And so ExercisAbilities here in Rochester, we realize that a lot of you are joining us from around the country, and we welcome you, and that's very exciting. There might be a center near you that provides the same type of services. So we welcome you to reach out in your own community, but we can also serve as a resource if you want to contact us after the series is over. We can help you navigate in your own community to find a place like ExercisAbilities. So at ExercisAbilities, we like to say that we're making healthy happen. We are a community-based wellness and rehabilitation center that's designed to work in collaboration with your physicians, with your major Parkinson's specialty center. We bring it home, make it accessible to you to continue your journey in health and wellness. And we use 6 areas that we like to address during your care at ExercisAbilities. And we consider this care lifespan, long-term. It's there to help you when you need it. And that in the areas of physical, environmental, social, mental, and emotional, and nutritional health. We believe those 6 components together make up health. And if we don't provide it, we work with partners, and that's all part of this workshop series. Partnerships are important in the community. And so getting your care from multiple places is something that we strongly encourage you to do. We also work with places like your traditional community fitness and wellness centers, because sometimes that's the right place to be getting your care. Places like ExercisAbilities, where you get a little bit higher level expertise, and then places like here in Rochester, the Mayo Clinic, which has the experts to help you in the medical journey as well as the psychology journey. And then places like Elder Network, and so they provide caregiver support and some of those key social supports that you need to be successful in life. And there's many more, but we welcome all of those partners today. You can move on to the next slide. So we are going to be just a couple of housekeeping things before we move on to Dr. Tipton and start our day. Again, welcome all of you for joining us today. We are going to be using the Q&A feature. So hopefully you're not new to Zoom. If you are, if you look across the bottom of your screen, there's a few things that we will use to guide our conversation today. We are going to use the one that says Q&A, and it looks like there's already one question in there. I'm going to open it up. And we already have a question from Warren that we'll utilize when Rio comes up to speak. And so thank you, Warren, for going ahead and adding that question in there. We encourage all of you right here at the beginning, go ahead and start asking your questions. I know Annie sent an email saying, bring your questions. Go ahead and start adding those in there. If you have any trouble, you could chat with Annie Schultz, who's on the call. She's helping with the moderation today, and she can help you out with those questions. Or you can add it in the Q&A and she can connect with you individually. We are not going to use the chat feature today in general to converse with the whole group. We'd like to really stick to that Q&A area. So if you can stay focused on that, that would be great. And you can raise your hand if you have a question. I believe, Annie, if I'm wrong, I'm having a hard time remembering that. If I'm wrong, please type in and let us know. But if you do have a question, you can click that raise your hand, and then that's something that Annie can reach out to you and help with. If there's anything else, please, again, just pop it in the Q&A and we can address that. We are recording this session today, and our panelists are aware of that. Again, we will have this when we are all finished. We will send you out an email with a few things. We're going to send out a survey. We'd love to hear from you and let us know how we did today or throughout the entire series. We're excited to get back news to the Parkinson's Foundation about the success of this program. But we'll also send out this recording. We'll send out some information pertinent to today's conversation as resources to you. And all of those will be available on our website, www.exerciseabilities.org. We welcome you to check out our website. We have a lot of great short exercise informational sessions on there. We have information. We blog and send out newsletters. There's a contact us form if you'd like us to follow up with you after. We do offer physical therapy, personal training, specialized personal training, nutrition, health, all of that right here at ExercisAbilities if you're local. I welcome all of those from across the country. So again, if you have questions about helping in your local region find these types of resources, please do reach out to us. I'm always available, Melanie at exerciseabilities.org, Rio, Zach, Annie, we're all available and would welcome your conversations. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started just a few minutes early to give Dr. Tipton lots of extra time. We always get lots of great questions for him as well. And so again, I already introduced Dr. Tipton. We've been very blessed to have him working on this workshop series and looking forward to his talk today. So thank you. And Dr. Tipton, you can take it away.
Good morning. So thank you for everyone that's joining us today. And I want to thank everyone at ExercisAbilities for organizing this third and final event. Really such a special event to be a part of and taking the time to dig into some things that, we don't get to talk about a lot in the clinic. So I'm excited to be a part of this again. So I hope that everyone is caffeinated. I think I probably start off most of my morning talks that way. So I hope everyone has their cup of coffee and is ready to rock and roll, because I'm going to go through a lot of information. Many of the slides will look familiar if you've joined us for sessions 1 or 2. So I'm not going to spend too much time on them because I will admit I put too many slides into the slideshow, but hopefully it's all pertinent and hopefully it's all enjoyable as well. So if you were with us the previous 2 times, you know that in November, I introduced you to the nervous system and introduced the concept of neurodegeneration. And then we started to study exercise and neurodegeneration in the context of animal studies. So mice and rats, we've learned a lot of studies using rodent models. And then in March, we briefly reviewed those things, and then I talked about some studies in human beings, because that's obviously a little bit closer to home than rodent models, in Alzheimer's disease, and then obviously in Parkinson's disease. So today we're going to rapidly review all of those things. We're not going to dive into all the nitty-gritty details for every slide. If you want that, you can go back to our previous recorded talks. And then kind of summarize, and then a little call to action at the end. So without further ado, I just want to introduce this slide. This is probably one of my favorite slides. So this is the type of image that I see in the neurology clinic every day. This is a cross-sectional MRI image of a brain. And if you can see my cursor, maybe you can, you'll notice that there's a little area here and a little area over here that if you were to look at them under a microscope, they look sort of like a honey bun. If we zoom in on that area, you can see it a little bit better here. That's an area of the brain called the hippocampus. It's critically important for learning and memory. And in patients with Alzheimer's disease, that area tends to be smaller, tends to get smaller, I should say, atrophy. If we zoom in further on that, we get a great image of what the cells look like within the brain. And you can see that it's beautifully organized. And that just gives us insight into the complexity of the system. And each one of those brain cells has little wire-like projections that go out and try to make connections with other wire-like projections, as you can see here. And those connections are these little studs that you see that go all the way down every one of those wire-like projections. And that's really where the communication occurs between brain cells. And if we take the most up close and personal look that we can with an electron microscope, we can see what those connections look like. This is actually one of the inputs, if you will, from a brain cell, a neuron. And at the very end of this connection, this is the end of one of those little wire-like studs, you see a lot of little balls, a lot of little circles. These actually contain chemicals that we refer to as neurotransmitters. And once an electrical signal comes down that wire, it causes these chemicals, the neurotransmitters, to be dumped out. Those chemicals then float across this little space to get to the next brain cell, the next neuron. And then that causes something special to happen in this postsynaptic neuron. And then electricity is then propagated down that. So it's a series of just elaborate connections of electricity causing chemicals to dump out, then causing more electricity, causing chemicals to dump out. And that's the way all of our brain cells communicate. Now you might wonder, well, how many of these brain cells do we have? We've got about 86 billion brain cells. And that makes up about 1,000 trillion of these connections. So I think it's a safe statement to say that this is probably the most complicated circuit known to man. So what happens when the system goes awry? And the concept of neurodegeneration is this: those brain cells are degenerating. Those brain cells are dying for whatever reason. And we know that neurodegenerative diseases can have many faces. You might recognize some of these faces. Robin Williams in the top left had Lewy body dementia. Dudley Moore in the top right had another disease, progressive supranuclear palsy. And Ozzy Osbourne in the left has Parkinson's disease. And so each one of these, and I should have said, and Ted Turner also had dementia with Lewy bodies. So each one of these diseases can have different symptoms, and I would imagine that most of the people on this call today recognize many of the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. So I put up the picture of Muhammad Ali, the great boxer who had Parkinson's disease. And if you watch the Olympics in 1996, when he lit the torch in Atlanta, Georgia, you'll remember that his left hand, the reason why it's a little bit blurry in this image is because his left hand was shaking and he had a rest tremor going along with his Parkinson's disease. And we know that Parkinson's disease is caused by abnormal accumulation of a misfolded protein. And we won't go into the details of what that means, but just it will come up a little bit later in the talk. And those misfolded proteins form these things called Lewy bodies. And those eventually lead to cellular death with neurodegeneration within the brain, and specifically in regions such as the substantia nigra, which we call it nigra because that means black. So in a normal brain, it's going to be black. You can see my cursor. But in a brain with Parkinson's disease, it's no longer black because those neurons have degenerated. And that's an area that's critically important for the control of motor symptoms. Now, we know from primarily from studies in Alzheimer's disease, a very different neurodegenerative disease, that the changes at the cellular level, the changes within the brain are occurring many years before the development of symptoms. So in the case of Alzheimer's disease, we're talking about different proteins being misfolded. But from this table, you can see that the red line represents abnormalities in the misfolded protein. So the x-axis, this horizontal line, represents time, and the y-axis, this vertical line, represents the biomarker magnitude. And what I basically mean is at the bottom, things are normal. At the top, things are becoming abnormal. So in the brains of Alzheimer's disease, we're seeing these abnormal proteins accumulate in the brain long before there's a change in brain structure correlating to the green line, long before there's a change in memory correlating with the purple line, or long before those memory symptoms are sufficient enough to interfere with someone's daily living, indicated by the dark green line. In the case of Alzheimer's disease, these brain changes are occurring 10, 20 years before the development of symptoms. And we believe the same is true for Parkinson's disease. So how can we intervene with this? So the purpose of this talk is to look at exercise and see if exercise provides some insight, some strategy for trying to mitigate the process that is Parkinson's disease. And it's important to understand the concept of neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is essentially this. It's the ability for those neural networks to change in order to suit the needs of the individual. So that may mean making a new road, or paving a gravel road, or making much more complicated connections so that the brain can accomplish a function in a much more efficient manner. This is also incredibly important for rehabilitation in certain neurologic diseases, such as stroke. Neuroplasticity is the reason why someone who suffered a stroke can then regain functions that they lost as a result of the stroke. So a few terminology, a few terms, some important terminology to know. Remember, a neuron, we've got 86 billion of these in the brain. It's one type of cell in the brain that transmits information in the form of an electrical impulse to that synapse. And what happens at the synapse? Well, we've got 1,000 trillion of these guys in our brain, and it's the space between the presynaptic neuron and the postsynaptic neuron. So we've got presynaptic neuron, synapse, postsynaptic neuron. And neurotransmitters are released from that presynaptic neuron into the synapse, travels across the synapse, and then it activates specific receptors on the postsynaptic neuron. Okay, remember that because it'll come up. And then neurotrophic factors are like fertilizer for our brain. They promote neuroplasticity by pruning and strengthening different synapses so that we can accomplish functions in a much more efficient manner. And some examples of neurotrophic factors are brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, or glial-derived neurotrophic factor, GDNF. Okay, so now neuroplasticity, this was a slide that I showed a while back. It basically showed that rats, or mice, I should say, that exercise were able to learn in a more efficient manner. We won't go into much of the details there, but we do have significant evidence that neuroplasticity exists in animal models and human models as well. We also know from human studies that from mouse studies, that in addition to forming new connections in the brain, neuroplasticity, there are actually some areas in the brain where new brain cells can form. Now you say, well, why is that a big deal? Well, the dogma for the longest time is that the number of brain cells you're born with is the number you got. It can only go down from there. So it's like, you know, when your teacher in grade school would say, everybody starts with 100 at the beginning of the year, and you can only go down, only go down from 100. So the number of cells you start with in the brain is the number you've got. It can only go lower. However, what we've learned now is that there are a few areas within the brain, one in particular, that hippocampus that I showed you earlier, where neurogenesis, or the creation of new brain cells, may occur. And we have good evidence of this in rodents that were exercised. So we put, you know, mice or rats on a treadmill, and then we measure cellular growth. And indeed, there was cellular growth in the hippocampus of these rodents. Remember that, because it will become more pertinent as we move on. More evidence for neuroplasticity with exercise. We know that we can treadmill exercise in mouse models of Parkinson's disease can increase the number of postsynaptic connections. So let me orient you with this slide briefly. MPTP is a Parkinson's disease model in a mouse. And so these little yellow dots represent presynaptic markers. And you see they're kind of sparse when you compare them to that of a normal mouse. But if we exercise the mouse, that the Parkinson's disease mouse model, those become more enriched. We can also look at postsynaptic markers, and we see the same thing, and they actually measure those out, and they were significant. We also see, you remember we looked at the studded wire-like projections earlier, those connections. This is a normal dendrite in this case. And then the Parkinson's disease model, you see it looks like a less healthy wire-like projection. There are less of these little studs. But when you exercise these animals, the studs start to come back. So we also know, remember we talked about postsynaptic receptors, that those neurotransmitters get activate on the postsynaptic neuron. In the case of Parkinson's disease, we talk a lot about dopamine. That's sort of the neurotransmitter that gets all the attention. And in fact, we found that exercise increases dopamine receptors. So we're seeing increased cellular connections. We're seeing increased dopamine receptors. We can even see increased neurogenesis in the hippocampus. So this is pretty convincing evidence in rodents. But if someone ends their argument for something with what a certain treatment does in mice and doesn't give you more than that, then you should be suspicious. So I'm going to tell you in a moment, not yet, but in a moment, about what we know about exercise in human beings. This is just one more example of neuroplasticity in a rat model of Parkinson's disease. And I'll just draw your attention to the top here. In the top, the striatum and the substantia nigra are areas that are incredibly important in Parkinson's disease. In fact, when I showed you on the earlier slide, that substantia nigra, the black part in non-Parkinson's disease brain that gets lighter in Parkinson's disease brains. Well, this is the substantia nigra in a normal mouse model. See, it's pretty dark here, but it gets light in this Parkinson's disease model. But we exercise and look at that, things improve. There was also an increase in those neurotrophic factors, the BDNF and the GDNF here. So now remember that I told you neurogenesis can increase the size of the hippocampus in a rodent. Well, there was actually a study that came out actually 10 years ago looking at exercise in human beings, and they did some cognitive testing before exercise, and they did an MRI of the brain, and they measured that little honey bun structure that we were looking at earlier, and they found that after exercise for 6 months, and 1 year, they measured them twice, that the hippocampus increased in size. Look at that. It goes up in the exercise group, both sides up in the exercise group compared to down in the non-exercise group. So we're seeing evidence in human beings. Oh, and their cognitive scores went up too. But we're seeing evidence that that hippocampus is getting bigger, and we don't think that it's just explained by enriching connections. We actually think that it's due to neurogenesis based on our information in rodent models. So really interesting and exciting stuff here. So in human beings, we also see, and I showed this slide last time, that those BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor levels, increase after 1 month of treadmill exercise. These were the specifics here, but we're not going to belabor the point. So we have increased BDNF levels in patients with Parkinson's disease after they've undergone these exercise regimens. So now I showed this slide the very first lecture, and I said these are the things that what we want to know how Parkinson's disease is how exercise interferes with Parkinson's disease. And so I'm going to break these down and kind of look at what we've learned over the past 3 sessions. So does exercise prevent Parkinson's disease? And kind of dovetailing off that, how early in life must one begin exercising to have that effect? And what type of exercise is best? So we've got just a plethora of studies that have shown the benefits of exercise, specifically midlife exercise, reducing later risk of Parkinson's disease. And these are not insignificant journals as well. You know, oftentimes you'll see commercials or documentaries or whatever, and they'll cite a study. You know, scientists showed this somewhere. And I would always encourage you to be careful. If you see the first page of the paper, if it says open access, that's an important thing to know. There are different types of ways of getting things published in the medical literature. Neither are inherently bad, but a little known fact is that there's the 2 models. One is you submit a paper, usually free of charge, and a researcher submits a paper free of charge. They review it, and if the journal thinks that it has merit after several other scientists have reviewed it and the editors agree, then it becomes published. And the journals, they make their money by having subscribers to the journals. There are other types of journals known as open access, which means you can Google it, you can go in, you can read everything that the journal has. And so you might say, well, how do those journals make money? And the way that they make money is that the researchers that submit their research pay money for their paper to be reviewed and accepted. So, you know, you can take that information how you will, a little bit of a motivator, different motivators in terms of how things get published. But I just say that so that when you're seeing someone citing a study, that you kind of know how that study came into being. And there's no perfect study, but it's important to know kind of the strength of the evidence, because all evidence is not created equal. These papers here are in reputable journals, and they all consistently show that there's a beneficial effect of exercise in preventing, decreasing the risk of Parkinson's disease. Actually this paper in the Journal of Neurology and this paper in the Journal of Brain are meta-analyses. So they were actually taking data from several different studies, showing and kind of putting those results together to come up with a stronger conclusion. And I'll draw your attention to the bottom right side of this slide. Anything to the left indicates that there's a protective effect. So they looked at these studies that were specifically male. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 studies, all to the left of the line. In a female studies, there was one that was just to the right of line barely, but then other studies to the left, and all together less, or to the left of one, which means decreased risk of Parkinson's disease. So I think it's a pretty convincing evidence that something is happening with midlife exercise, reducing the later risk of Parkinson's disease. So all that together, I think we have pretty good evidence that exercise is protective against Parkinson's disease. So how early in life must one begin exercising? And early is likely better. Remember, we're talking about a neurodegenerative disease that's starting many, many, many years before the development of symptoms. So it makes sense that you would want to intervene as soon as possible. A small change here, you think about shuttles and space travel. You have to make small changes in your trajectory, because a small change can result in a big difference on where you end up. And so I think in the case of neurodegenerative diseases, a small change very early on can really make a big difference when we're looking at someone's clinical condition 10, 20 years down the road. But what if you're not exercising today? Well, yesterday is better than today, but today is better than tomorrow. So that's a motivator to start now. And what type of exercise is best? Well, the best exercise, at least the best evidence suggests, it's aerobic exercise. So anything that makes you hot, sweaty, and tired should do it. Next question, does exercise slow the progression of Parkinson's disease? And if so, what type of exercise? What symptoms are slowed? How does it do this? Are we replacing brain cells? And I think we've got some answers for that. So I showed this study previously. This is a great study that was published 3 years ago, looking at a group of patients with Alzheimer's disease, okay, not Parkinson's disease, but Alzheimer's disease. There were 275 patients with Alzheimer's disease, and these folks were special. Okay, they actually didn't have symptoms. They were asymptomatic. And you might say, well, how do we know that they have Alzheimer's disease? Well, we measured biomarkers in their spinal fluid and with particular imaging, and we know that they did have signs of Alzheimer's disease. But perhaps even more importantly, they also were carriers for specific mutations that we know are deterministic to develop Alzheimer's disease. So there are 3 genes that if you have a mutation in any one of them, it is a virtual certainty that you're going to develop Alzheimer's disease. Moreover, these are the type of mutations that are passed down pretty much from every generation. So you've got a patient that'll say, yeah, my mom had it, my grandfather had it. And so if you look back, you can kind of extrapolate when symptoms are expected to occur. It's going to be about the same age going through someone's family tree, roughly the same age. And so that provides a unique opportunity to look and see, is there something that delays the onset of someone's symptoms from the expected age of onset, or something that hastens it? You know, are they doing something that causes them to develop symptoms sooner? So it's a very unique patient population to study, and we've gained some really important insights by studying those patients. And the big finding from this study, and I'll draw your attention right to the middle of the slide, is that those that exercised at least 150 minutes per week had a 15.1 year delay in symptom onset. Let me say that again in case the audio went out or you think the audio went out. 15.1 year delay in the onset of symptoms. Okay. We have no medication that comes even close to doing that. So I think just hearing that should be impetus to go hop on the treadmill. And that was aerobic exercise. Okay. So now let's bring it into Parkinson's disease. Exercise in early Parkinson's disease. What does it do? Well, this is a big study. Almost 5,000 patients that compared non-exercisers to low exercisers to regular exercisers. And that 150 minutes a week was, again, sort of a benchmark. So anywhere from 1 to 150 minutes were low exercisers, and greater than 150 were high exercisers. And they found that regular exercise at baseline had an association with quality of life, improved mobility, and physical function, which kind of makes logical sense, but it is important to show it in a study. And the regular exercisers at 1 year had less progression of disease, less caregiver burden, and less cognitive decline. I mean, that's kind of the trifecta there, if you ask me. LSVT, we've talked a little bit about LSVT. Some of our other participants in this program have talked about the ins and outs of LSVT big, and this is an excellent program. And I show this because, because we have good evidence from a study that came out about 11 years ago in the journal Movement Disorders. And those patients that participated in the LSVT big program over 4, 8, 12, and 16 weeks had a decrease in their UPDRS motor score. So some of you may be familiar with the UPDRS. That's the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale. It's a big scale that helps us to quantify the symptoms related with Parkinson's disease. And there are different parts, and part 3 is the motor score. So this was looking specifically at the motor score. And there was a reduction, look, at 16 weeks by about 4 points on the motor score. And that's not an insignificant decrease. And it's not a medication either. So, you know, the risk, we're always weighing risks and benefits in medicine. And the risk of doing this, essentially 0. So why wouldn't you do something where there's no risk and there's a lot of potential for benefit? There's also evidence from functional MRI imaging of the brains in patients with Parkinson's disease that exercising increases activity within pertinent brain regions when patients with PD are doing motor sequencing tasks. Okay, so let's summarize this. Does exercise slow the progression of Parkinson's disease? Honestly, this is unclear, but it is associated with better mobility, physical function, and quality of life. So what type of exercise? Again, regular exercise, at least 150 minutes a week of aerobic exercise. LSVT big, there's good data there. And what symptoms are slowed? UPDRS motor score with LSVT, physical activity and mobility with aerobic exercise. And how does it do this? Well, it's probably by enhanced neuroplasticity. I think all the data would support that. Are we replacing brain cells? Probably not, although maybe there are some cells being replaced in the hippocampus. And the caveat, recognize that none of these studies are actual proof that we're slowing the disease process. Those studies haven't been done yet. It's a very hard study to do. And we've talked about limitations of studies in one of our previous talks. But just consider that it's not actual proof, but I think we have good supportive evidence that exercise is doing something, and it's doing something good. All right, so now question number 3, does exercise prevent Parkinson's disease related cognitive decline? And if so, again, what type of exercise? So I showed this slide last time, and it was a study of 28 people with Parkinson's disease. They had an exercise regimen. It was strength and cardiovascular training, pretty intense, 2 one-hour sessions per week for 12 weeks. And they measured some frontal lobe functions because there are different cognitive profiles of Parkinson's disease, separate talk for a separate time, but measuring areas or cognitive domains that we know are affected in Parkinson's disease, there was evidence that exercise improved frontal lobe based executive function. Executive function is kind of planning, inhibitions, logical thinking, that sort of thing. There was another study that essentially demonstrated the same thing, just using a few different cognitive testing modalities to do so. Exercise, again, in early Parkinson's disease and later dementia, 17 patients with Parkinson's disease, again, showing consistent information. This is another thing that when you're trying to scrutinize the medical literature to figure out, is this just a one-off finding? Is reproducibility. You want to see studies that are agreeing with studies that are agreeing with studies, because anybody that, if someone does this study in, say, Italy, but nobody else can reproduce it, then that should make a red flag go up and potentially question the data. But if you've got multiple people, multiple places with similar protocols reproducing that same information, then it's a pretty safe bet that what you're dealing with is solid data. Again, this is just kind of beating a dead horse, but just showing again, 20 people with Parkinson's disease, separate study, aerobic exercise improved cognition using a test called the Wisconsin card sorting test. Okay, so from that, does exercise prevent PD-related cognitive decline? It protects against cognitive decline. There's not a magic bullet that is going to absolutely prevent it from happening, but we do have good evidence that it protects against it, so potentially delaying the onset or decreasing the severity. If so, again, what type of exercise? Aerobic exercise. Oftentimes in these studies, the control group, the non-intervention group that we're trying to compare exercise to, they may either be sedentary or sometimes it's stretching groups. So stretching, while there's nothing wrong with stretching, it's not an adequate substitute for aerobic exercise. And we didn't even touch on the cardiovascular benefits of aerobic exercise. But remember, if we're working out our heart, we're decreasing our rate of risk of stroke and risk of heart attack. And I think we'd all agree those are pretty bad things to avoid. So what are the next steps? This is sort of the call to action. So I don't know if I'd be so arrogant as to say this is the money slide, but I like this one. So, all right, step 1, levodopa is the most effective medication for Parkinson's disease, period. It's important if you have Parkinson's disease to discuss with your doctor whether you're on the optimal dose. Step 2, find an accountability partner. Exercise can be fun, but it can be even more fun if you're doing it with friends or a loved one. So it's important to find someone that you enjoy doing these things with. It'll help both of your health, and you get that social interaction while you're doing it. And you know, there are some mornings when you just don't feel like going to the gym. And if you know that there's going to be someone there waiting for you, or if you know that someone's going to call you on the phone to make sure you're up and out of bed, that can really help to get things going. And you'll be glad that you did. Excuse me. Step 3, work towards at least 150 minutes of aerobic exercise per week. If you're not doing it right now, if you're not exercising at all right now, you can't start tomorrow at 150 minutes of exercise per week. Work towards that goal, because we know that that benchmark is associated with some really good things that I showed earlier. And step 4, consider participating in a formal program, whether it's LSVT Big or programs at the YMCA or Rock Steady Boxing. We had some folks talk about that back in March. All of those are great ways of getting the kind of exercise that can really make a difference in this disease. And step 5, have fun with it. Yeah, this is a disease that no one's signing up to get, no one's volunteering to get Parkinson's disease, but it is a disease that we can intervene upon. We've got medications that can help with a variety of symptoms. And then we've got things like exercise that can really intervene upon the disease process itself. You can have fun doing it. Exercise is associated with improved mood as well. So it's really it's hard to find a bad side to this. Remember that risk versus benefit. Why wouldn't you do something where the risk is essentially 0 and you've got all the room for benefit? And remember, it does matter how fast you pedal. Sometimes I'll talk to people and they say, oh yeah, I walk for 3 hours, 4 hours every day. And as it turns out, they're walking with friends, they're getting the social interaction, and they just have a great time having conversation, catching up on the news, the latest gossip. And then you learn, they're not going very far. They're not walking very far. They're not getting that aerobic exercise. You got to get the heart rate up. You got to sweat. You got to get a little short of breath because, it's like if you go to the gym and you're just lifting, the 1 pound weights, that's probably not going to do much as far as strength building. You got to push yourself. And this study showed from patients that were on a exercise bike, look to the right side of the slide, is that your pedal rate was positively correlated with increasing connectivity in particular brain regions. And I mentioned this a little bit last time. So it does matter how fast and how hard you're working. So work hard, battle this disease. So a few resources. Melanie mentioned that I have a podcast. It's called Long Live the Brains. And the idea, we also have a YouTube channel and the links are here. It's a channel intended to provide information about Parkinson's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases. We have a lot of great interviews. We talk about things like exercise and how the disease works, updates and research. We had a great interview last week on respite care programs. So something cool to check out, or at least I think it's cool if you're into podcasts or YouTube videos, or if you're not, this is a good chance to be. And I would also refer you to the American Parkinson's Disease Association website, the APDA. There's a really cool app. It's pretty easy to use, so don't just shy away when you hear me say app, but check it out. It's a symptom tracker that can be really helpful. Parkinson's disease is the most complicated disease there is, period. And it can be hard to keep track of the symptoms. This is a nice little app that can help you sort of get those things logged in and kind of organize your thoughts. So then when you see your doctor and they say how things are going, you can say, well, let's talk about it. And you've got it right there. So I'd encourage you to check it out. It's available apparently in both Google and Apple app stores. All right, so I went through this at the beginning. No reason to read this slide again. If anything didn't make sense, if you've got any questions, I'd love to speak to you about it now or potentially at the end of the day. And also take a look at the lecture 1 and lecture 2, because some of these slides that I moved through rather quickly, I had more detail to talk about in previous times, but for the sake of time, I wanted to kind of move through things. So I think we may have just a few minutes for questions. I'd love to field any if there are, and if not, we can move on. Thank you.
So at the moment, I don't have any questions from anyone, but I do welcome you guys to go ahead and think about that. Again, if you go to the bottom of your screen, there's the Q&A, and if you click on that, you can type your question, and then we can answer it throughout the series. Yeah, Dr. Tipton, thank you. I think it's from a physical therapist to hear, we just get so excited to hear physicians be excited and speak about exercise in such a way that is evidence-based, and just really, really excited to help push people in that direction to adding exercise to their routine. I will speak, and Rio is going to be coming up here soon. Dr. Bentley will be coming up here soon talking about, and as well as Zach talking about more exercises, but that it matters how fast you pedal, and it matters how fast you walk and how much you walk is definitely something that we're always trying to help individuals with. We do here at ExercisAbilities have something called a med bike. There's also a similar device called a TheraCycle. Those are also evidence-based. We've talked about those throughout the series of high-speed bicycling that are very much evidence-based. And you can actually access our med bike here at ExercisAbilities for no cost, because it was given to us through a grant process, and so people can come in and ride that med bike. It goes fast and it keeps you moving, and it really is evidence-based to show all the things like Dr. Tipton outlined, as well as we have different devices here on treadmills to help you safely go faster. So body weight support systems, some are very easy to use, some are a little bit more complicated, but we help you with that here. And so if you're thinking, I don't feel safe to go to the YMCA, I don't feel like I can do that anymore, I'm scared of treadmills, I'm afraid I will fall. In particular, here in the Rochester, Southeast Minnesota area, ExercisAbilities can help you with that, because we have devices, medical-based devices that are different than those that you encounter either at home or in the community-based setting, that can help you get to that point and help you feel safe on a treadmill, help you go fast on a bike with a motor. And so we have that here, as well as those coming to us from around the country. There might just be a center near you that also has those devices. You don't usually find them at the YMCA or your local community fitness center. And so you may have to seek a medical-based fitness center like we have here. Warren, we do have a question before we switch over to Dr. Bentley. Warren says it is very difficult to pedal fast. How do you break through? Dr. Tipton, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I brought this slide up again. I think I put these steps in a specific order. And number one, you got to make sure that the tank is full. So making sure that you're on the appropriate medication, because remember, this is a neurodegenerative disease. No doubt about it. We know that the cells in the brain that produce dopamine have degenerated. There are other cells too, but as far as motor, which is what we're talking about at the moment, as far as motor function, that dopaminergic loss it's the limiting factor. And so levodopa, if you look in a biochemical pathway, levodopa is one biochemical step away from pure dopamine. So you take the levodopa and you are filling up the tank of dopamine that's empty. And you may have to do it several times throughout the day. And we know that as the disease progresses, you have to fill the tank up more frequently. But levodopa always works in Parkinson's disease. It's just a matter of using it in the appropriate manner. So making sure that the tank is filled up, and it's not going to be the same 5 years from now as it is today. So considering the tank is changing. So levodopa is number one. And then other things, if you think about the proverbial tank, sleep, making sure that you're getting adequate sleep. If you're not sleeping, you're not going to be very effective at anything, and you're certainly not going to want to pedal fast. Making sure that you're eating a balanced diet. A lot of people ask about dietary changes related to Parkinson's disease, and a lot of people think you should cut down on protein. That's not the case. Most of the time, it's Mediterranean diet tends to have a large amount of evidence towards it, and there are some other diets as well. But make sure that you're getting good quality calories so that your body has energy to be able to exercise. So think about all the aspects and the different tanks that need to be filled up, is what I would say to that.
Yeah, and I'll answer that too. Again, coming back to what I was just talking about the motorized bikes. So in particular, when you talk about pedaling and using bicycles as that form of both aerobic but also neuroplasticity generating activities, there's two things out there in the evidence. Tandem bikes, which you have a picture of, having that exercise partner, whoever that might be, pedal fast for you. And then that forces, so we call that forced exercise. You may need forced exercise to be able to break through. A standard bike in the settings of Parkinson's disease is very difficult at some point, or maybe some point throughout the day, with the changes of your medications, might be difficult for you alone to break through. And that is why research shows so much in the direction of the motorized bikes and the tandem bikes. Whether, at home, you could get one of those, they're everywhere, those motorized bikes. May not be safe for you on the streets where you're at with your balance, but you could put it on a stand and you could use that in your home on a bike stand, a stationary bike stand. And then you have a motorized bike. You can go to a center like ExercisAbilities and use the med bike or the TheraCycle regularly. And that is a great way to help break through. Or get a tandem bike and have a care partner go out. It just depends on where you're at with safety and balance. You may need to work up to that. So good question. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Tipton. I think he's going to stay on off and on here, and we'll be around later for the expert roundtable as well. So let's switch. Everyone. Yeah, thank you. We'll switch gears to Dr. Rio Bentley, and she can join us on video. I just had seen her there. Welcome. As I introduced her earlier, she is a neurofocused physical therapist here at ExercisAbilities and works with our Parkinson's disease and neurodegenerative disease community. And so we'll hand it over to Rio.
Yes, thank you, Melanie. Okay. I think I got this all set up properly here. So yes, thank you. I'm Dr. Rio Bentley. I'm a physical therapist here specializing in neurological disorders and those with Parkinson's disease, and kind of devised this PowerPoint around some other questions that we've had earlier on in these presentations. We've talked a lot about exercise and why it's so important, and that's awesome and that's wonderful. But I think a lot of you had questions on how can I do that safely, and how do I know what may be appropriate for me as far as when you're going out trying to choose a way to exercise and do it without putting yourself at risk. And so there's a lot of things out there when it comes to Parkinson's or just fall prevention in general. And so I wanted to kind of just do a little bit of a brief overview of the different devices that we have and what the evidence tells us about using them and using them specifically for those with Parkinson's disease. So first of all, a little bit of a definition slide here. So when I say mobility device or gait aid, what do I mean? A mobility device is anything that really helps someone who has some sort of balance or walking deficit move more freely and more independently. Okay, and so that can be anything from as simple as a cane, of what we often think about, or even a wheelchair for those who can't actually walk anymore. And how this can relate more specifically to Parkinson's disease is that we often see this freezing of gait, okay? And so you may be able to walk really well, but at some point you have that issue in your gait where you freeze, maybe when you're walking through a doorway or trying to initiate your steps. And so that gait impairment is something that we can sometimes look at a mobility device to assist us with to keep walking. The other thing that we really see changing in those with Parkinson's disease is our balance reactions. And what that means is that, say all of a sudden your cat walks under your feet or you catch your toes on the rug, your ability to quickly step to catch yourself to prevent that fall slowly kind of gets degenerated or makes it more difficult to do as the disease progresses. And that's something that we know happens. We can test, we can measure that. And so are there devices out there that can help us with that and then also prevent falls in the process? So why is this important, or why might I look to using some sort of mobility device? Sustain independence. The biggest thing is we want you to be able to keep exercising, moving, be out with your friends, do the things you want to do, and do them without fear, okay? And then also improve quality, that freezing, those balance reactions. Sure, you can go out and you can walk, but say it's very slow and you're shuffling and you can't get very far very fast, and it feels like you're expending a lot of energy to do not very much work. So can mobility aids potentially help you with that? And one of the bigger ones that I look at is decreasing that fall risk, or the fear that you may have of falling, to keep you safe. The biggest thing that we want to do is keep you moving. And how can we do that? So I know we've talked about falls in previous conversations a little bit, but just to touch on that a little bit more, falls are pretty darn common. Okay, so some of the stats here that I'm going to read off for you. So about 1 in 4 adults, so that's 28% of the population over the age of 65, are going to report a fall every year. And that's pretty high. And that's just the general population, not those with any type of neurodegenerative disease. And then in those with Parkinson's disease, it's up to 60.5% every year. Okay. So that's pretty prevalent falling. Okay. And 39% of those become recurrent, meaning more than one fall a year. It's pretty high in those with the disease. But why do we care, right? It may seem like some of those falls may seem small. Oh, I just caught my toe. I caught myself, just a small bruise, no big deal. But the reason we care about those falls becoming more serious is that a bigger fall can result in a fracture, and then a fracture can result in you being not on your feet anymore. Once you're not on your feet anymore, suddenly you get weaker, and then you kind of have to start that process all over again. So going back to Dr. Tipton's talk, we have to get that fuel in the tank. And if you're not able to be up and move, you kind of have to restart that circle. So if we can prevent that from happening, the better off you'll be and the better off your health will be. And that's what we really want to focus on, okay? So fall prevention, again, just super important. If you have any fear of falling, have had falls, but haven't seen a physical therapist, please do. Either locally here, if you're in the Rochester area, please come see us, or across the country, please find a physical therapist that can help you to reduce your fall risk. We want you to be able to keep moving. All of these presentations have hopefully prepared you to do that. But also one of the big things that we can do for fall prevention is to use a safe mobility device. Okay, so that's why this talk is more important. So before I talk through all of these types that are available, I do want to just touch on the fact that if we can keep you without a mobility device, that's what we want to do. I know that there's sometimes a hesitancy that, oh, only really old people or really people that are struggling use that. And I don't want to look like that. I don't want to look like it's hard for me to move. And we understand that. We want to keep you moving. And also there is a lot of evidence that shows us that when we use these devices, sometimes we get a slower gait speed, or sometimes we can't walk as well as far as quality with bigger strides. But we have to take everything into account. If you're walking without one, but you're going to also then fall, is it better to use one? And the only way to really know is to get evaluated by a therapist. Okay, so that's why this is important. And I'm going to talk you through a lot of them today. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just examples. So there's canes, walking sticks, poles, four-wheel walkers, front-wheel walkers, a U-walker, which is kind of a new technology here, different types of wheelchairs, platform walkers, hemi walkers, which are much less common, loft strands, crutches, and again, even more than this. But these are some of the most common ones, and we'll talk through some more of these now in more detail. Okay, so the first one here today is something that I see used a lot, which is great, but walking poles, in more specific urban poling or Nordic walking type programs. They're great because they promote reciprocal motion. Okay, so you're going back and forth with your upper arms and your legs, which is something that we tend to lose, especially in Parkinson's disease. They promote that upright posture position so that you're not hunched forward when used properly. And they also assist you in continuing having a better base of support, which can prevent falls and is very important. I will touch on, there are many different types of hiking poles. We have some in our clinic that are more straight up and down. I am going to see if I can make myself, I might stop, I might just shrink myself back a little bit here to grab these poles. But these come in a variety of sizes, if you guys can still see me here. Ours in our clinic have just a flat bottom, okay? So they're not going to assist in that forward propulsion as much. These are more hiking sticks, we would call them, okay? But what they do still do for me is keep me in an upright position. The urban poling actually designed with almost that flat bottom, which you can kind of see on the slide here, which is going to propel you forward, which can be helpful, again, with those with Parkinson's disease. But huge variety out there. There is good evidence for using these poles, smaller level studies, but still good studies that have shown that it can actually assist in that freezing of gait feature that we talked about, where just starting to help you initiate those steps, because the pole gives you a nice visual cue. And so there is good evidence for these. There's groups that go out and do this. It's a good way to find friends that you can do it with, usually get in more dynamic environments and keep it more fun. So there's our first one here, okay? Okay, canes. So, huge variety in this level of cane world here. So I have some of those smaller pictures, but there are a lot out there now, a lot that get advertised for, some that have more therapeutic reasons than others. So I will say that with canes by themselves, more evidence to support not using them than there is to use them in those with Parkinson's disease. That being said, the laser cane on the left is the one that has shown more evidence to improve freezing of gait. And that is because that laser cane, and I don't have one in the clinic, but it is a typical cane, but what it does is provide a laser across the floor on where you should be stepping. So it gives you a visual cue on how to advance your leg, and that's why it can help. The other more traditional canes, studies have shown that the coordination of trying to use it and only having something in one side is what makes it challenging for those with Parkinson's disease. However, always important to include these in here, because let's say you have this diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, but maybe you also had a total hip within the last year, or maybe you just have arthritis on one side of your body because of an old injury, or anything like that. If you have one side that's more prone than the other, then it may make more sense for you to use a cane to support that weaker side. There's a huge variety, like I said. So that laser cane we talked a little bit about, this is more of that standard cane. They can be wood, they can be metal, they can be a huge variety of different materials. But you see that it just has that standard bottom on it. I'm going to grab mine here as well. Okay, so this is one that we have in our clinic. Has a little bit of a different top on it. You'll see this kind of L shape. Just gives a better grip. But some patients prefer, if they're going to use a cane long term, to get one that's more of the design that they want, and that's wonderful. Ours just has this flat bottom here as well. But then I'm going to kind of move over to the far side. You can also get canes with wider bases on the bottom. Now, the one I have in this photo is actually one we do like because it has a moving bottom, which means that as you step, the cane will weight shift with you and kind of propel you forward. The ones that we don't usually recommend as much are these quad canes here. And why? Is because they have this very, very large base of support, which makes them more stable. However, when you're trying to walk and pull them forward with you, they actually tip a lot and leave the ground and kind of make it more so that you're stopping your forward momentum rather than pushing you forward. That being said, maybe you do have a very injured side of your body that you need to use just anything to keep you moving forward. That's why this may still be an option, and you may see other people using it. And so I wanted to include it just so you know that it is an option as a more stable type cane device. But overall, when we're talking about canes and those with Parkinson's disease, if we're going to use one, it will be more of this one over on the left than any of the others. Okay. Now, your standard front-wheeled walker. Okay, so there's lots of pros and cons to these guys, and they're the traditional ones you see most commonly with those who have more severe walking impairments. I'm going to kind of back myself up so I can pull one over. The pros to this is that it's very stable. Okay, if you have a lot of balance concerns, you've had repeated falls, this is more of a device that can be helpful. A con is that it's typically something that we use within the home. Because of the small wheels and the back, it's hard to take this out into the community, and it's hard to go longer distances. It's not exactly designed for prolonged mobility. They're sturdy, but they're not fast. Okay, I'm gonna tip this down a little bit. So I've got my standard walker here. They do fold up nicely, which is great to use if you need to transport them, say to appointments. So that's wonderful. But they also promote things that tend to not be favorable for those with Parkinson's, meaning I see them misused a lot in the sense of being at the wrong height. And so people are leaning really far forward to reach them and to use them, or they're being pushed really far out in front of you. Also something that we don't want, and then will tend to lead to catching and then more falls. And so if we're using this, we want to make sure that someone is using it properly. Again, please use a PT to learn how to size it for you and for your body. But it can be helpful, especially later stages in the disease, to keep someone moving and to keep you on your feet and to keep you going forward. Sizing wise in general, just to give you tips and tricks at home, if it's going to be a while before you can see a medical provider, try and tip this down. If you're standing nice and tall in the device, we're going to match that up to your wrist. Okay, so I'm going to kind of turn to the side here. If I'm standing tall, this hits me right about at my wrist crease. That tells me that this is about the correct size for me to use. If it's any higher, it's not going to give you the support you need to be able to push down. If it's lower, again, you're really going to lean forward. And then that's just going to promote that forward lean posture, not going to help you move more freely, which is ultimately our goal here. Okay, four-wheel walker. So this guy has a lot more pros to it, much more common gait aid that I see used. And why? Because it has the four wheels, which means more degrees of motion. You can turn it easier. The wheels are larger. They're designed for different levels of uneven ground for more community-based movement. And it still does fold up easily to be transported in vehicles to take with you. The other great benefit to it is that it can have added stability with the brakes. that we have on the device. And then say you're going out for a really, really long walk, but you're a little bit worried that you might get tired, or you're going somewhere that you're not familiar with where you might be able to take a break. Having the seat right on this device where you can just take a short rest and then get up and go again is a great feature to keep you out. I don't want people to avoid going out because they don't know if they'll be able to find somewhere to sit and rest. And sometimes by just having this device, you have that confidence enough to get out, keep moving, and then just use it as needed. And you end up walking even more. So that's wonderful. It does have similar cons as far as posturing goes if it's fitted improperly or used improperly. The biggest thing I see is that people have these too short. So same to the other walker, and then they end up really leaning forward. And they don't have the support that they need or the posture that they need. The thing I will say with these devices is that we have a tendency to think we're going to hit our feet on them. And so people push them out in front of them to avoid hitting their feet. And then that's how they end up too far in front of us. I'm going to back myself up here. We say we want the walker in a box, okay? And so you should be walking right up next to it, not out here, not even here. Your legs should be right next to that walker. And you should be walking right within it. Hard to see with the double screen, guys, so bear with me. Sizing is the same as the front wheel walker, so you should really match up that wrist crease, okay, to make sure it's the right height. And again, for size ordering and knowing if this is a safe device for you, appropriate for where you're at, please see a PT to help you with that in person. Okay, and then this is the nuance, okay? So U-step walkers, there's two different pictures here of different types, but InStep is the company. What they really wanted to do is create a walker that was better designed for those with neurological and degenerative conditions for better control and stability, but still that freedom. So kind of trying to marriage the two previous walkers we talked about. They are also the company that has that laser cane, okay? And so they really have focused on trying to find devices that keep you mobile, but also safe. The evidence for these is limited, but positive. Okay, so not huge studies, but effective studies to the point where they've started to get insurances to pay for some of these devices, which is usually a really good sign because that shows us that the evidence is proving that it's working. I do have one here that I'll be able to show you in a little bit, but it does look more cumbersome and you can see that. However, the biggest thing with these walkers is the base. Okay, so it gives you so much more control. The size is not necessarily bigger than our other walker, and I'll kind of show you that here. However, it's just built to keep you on the ground. So when those balance reactions happen, like we talked about, the walker doesn't just tip over with you, it will hold you more upright. It gives you more control because there are 7 wheels on this base versus 4. So even more degrees of freedom. The brakes also work opposite. So while our 4-wheel walker has the brakes to slow you down like a bicycle, you squeeze to slow down. These U-step walkers actually work in opposite. So you cannot move forward until you squeeze the handles. When you release the handles at any time, the brakes will initiate. So if you let go of your hand because you're maybe falling or losing your balance, that triggers the device to put the brakes on. And that's how it can be even more helpful for controlling falls. They're very customizable as well, which we don't really have with our other walkers for height and for your needs. So we see here on the left that this one actually even has those platforms on the top. And so if perhaps down the disease progression, you're really finding that anterior posture, this can help correct that without slowing down your gait. It'll keep you upright, but let you keep moving and doing it safely, especially when it's hard to replicate that, like we talked about sometimes outside of a therapy or medical center, which are really great. So I'm gonna go one more here. This is the base more zoomed in that I was talking about. So 3 wheels in the front, your 2 big guys in the back, and 2 more in the back. So a lot more of those freedoms. It looks extra large here, but it's actually not. I'm going to back you up here and try to show you better. So I've got the U-Walker right here, and then the 4-wheel right next to it. So actually, they're quite similar in size. The base is the same width, but that U-Step walker is going to give you just so much more stability due to the fact that the way it's built, the wheels and the opposite brakes. Okay. I also can't move it when it's still versus this one just rolls away. And you have to release it to go forward. The other nice thing is that the U-Step can be customized to be just one side. So like we talked about earlier, maybe you have other things going on, other diseases, an injury, or maybe your disease just affects one side more than the other, which can happen. You only need to be able to use one of the hands to release, and that can all be set up on the device, which is really nice, and keep you going. They also can put that same laser feature onto these devices to help with that freezing of gait, to really give you a visual cue to help you continue stepping appropriately. Wheelchairs, another thing I want to touch on, can sometimes be a sore subject when it comes time to be needing to use one to keep you mobile and out in the community. However, there are many different types that are available, and I just want to kind of touch on what those may look like. Okay, so all the way on the left here is transport chairs. So this is nothing customizable. This is something you would just order online or get from a local store. The wheels are small, so more similar to our walker wheels that we were showing you. And the chair itself is cloth. What's nice about these chairs is that they're foldable. They're easy to go in the car. They're more used for my clients when they have to go out in a busy environment where they just don't feel comfortable walking. They're really scared of falling, but they want to be out and they want to be with their family. But they can still maybe walk at home when it's less busy. So they just need something to kind of get them by in certain unique situations, or go to medical appointments sometimes. This is what I often see clients using. But then from there, there's so many more options. So we become more and more customizable, ones that fit very uniquely to your needs. Again, more likely if you have other health conditions. And it can even be all the way up to a fully motorized power chair. And so many in between. There's scooters available. There's so many options for us when we get to this point, all based on what you need. Again, our biggest thing is to keep you moving and exercising so that you don't need these types of chairs. But how great that we have them available to keep you out doing the things you want to do with your family, socializing safely. So that just so people know what's out there long term. So the big question, what one is right for me on my journey? What's safe? Okay. And what are you going to use? Okay. That's what's the biggest thing. You can't come to a PT and I tell you, wow, you really need to be using this walker. And you listen and go home and say, well, I'm never going to use a walker. Well, then that's not the right device for you. Okay. We need to work together to find something that's going to keep you safe, but let you get in all this exercise that we know is important for you, and also keep you from falling. And so it's really a team effort to find what's right and best for you as an individual patient. Okay. So again, same status, same quote that I've kind of said throughout, and brief overview of all of these devices. And again, there's many more that I didn't even talk about today, but these are the most common ones that we see and that are available. And so just like Dr. Tip did, I have a couple minutes here really quick to answer questions if you have them. Otherwise, I will also try to jump back on at the end if I can for any more questions.
So thank you so much, Rio, for that presentation. We have one question for you. What are the best shoes outside and slippers inside for the best balance? Are soft, cushy soles and heels good for example, like Skechers was in that. So if you could talk about shoes a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So slippers, the biggest thing with inside is that if you are going to be wearing slippers, they need to have the back on them, not just slide in, because those will slide off your feet and become a huge fall risk. Also having something more on the bottom as far as tread goes. So you don't want any that don't have that true bottom sole on them, meaning a lot of the slip-on will just have that flat surface. We don't want that. No traction. Okay, so please avoid those. You can still find ones that are very comfortable to be worn in the house that still have those things we talked about. The brand wise, I mean, usually moccasins have both, which just sounds a little silly. Also the front. So sometimes they'll just have that very narrow front support over your toes. The wider back that is, the more support it's going to give you. Outside shoes, yes, usually Skechers are okay. The biggest thing, tennis shoes that actually support the top of your foot, give you traction. But again, very customizable for each person. So that's a generalized answer.
Yeah. Do you find that people don't necessarily love when we recommend supportive tennis shoes because of the stickiness of them wanting to slide their feet often in the progression of Parkinson's disease? And so, really looking at those slippers or smooth shoes as seeming to be more advantageous for them to get along versus that competing conflict of wanting to have support and balance.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard part. The sliding feels better, like you said, with that conflict, but it also tends to lead to I'm sliding and then there was something in my way that I didn't expect to be there, and suddenly that leads to that tripping hazard that we worry about. Same with the tennis shoes. The competing factor of my feet want to shuffle versus the shuffling has almost become a cue, an auditory cue for clients of, oh, when I hear that squeak, I know I'm shuffling, and I have to do that correction that I know how to do in my head to help myself move better, which is give and take. And so that's why I say a generalized overview, because it's going to depend on what your cues are for yourself and how you're more mobile in your home and what your gait looks like to know what's safe for you. But in general, I want you in a supportive shoe. It's not going to slip off of your foot.
Great. That's great. Thank you so much. Again, if you have any further questions for Rio offline, she can be contacted at rio@exerciseabilities.org.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And we will move on to our next speaker, and that is Zach Curry. I introduced him earlier as one of our certified personal trainers here at ExercisAbilities. He's also a certified lifestyle coach. He works in our health coaching area as well as the neurologic recovery team with his background in power and neurologic recovery. And so Zach's going to talk to us a little bit about flexibility today.
Yeah, thanks, Melanie. I'm going to slide my computer back a little bit here just so I can make sure everyone can see my movements okay. Okay, good. And so, yeah, today we're talking about flexibility and flexibility as it relates to Parkinson's. And to get started off, I kind of want to just talk about flexibility just a little bit. And, oftentimes, maybe you guys have heard your physical therapists or friends, family say, oh, you got to stretch more, right? You got to get more flexible. You got to stretch more. Now, that's something that we hear a lot. And stretching, I think, is fantastic. Especially to loosen up tight areas of the body. But I look at stretching oftentimes how I look at strength training and things of that nature. There's a time when we are rehabbing and trying to get our bodies sort of back up to par, so to speak here, that, we need to isolate an area. Okay, so like if I was having rotator cuff issues in my shoulder, I'm working with my physical therapist. We're going to do some exercises, right, to isolate and strengthen that rotator cuff. But eventually the end goal would be to be able to sort of integrate that rotator cuff into my daily activities. So we isolate and then we integrate. And we see that with strength training in general, right? We talk about people, maybe isolated like chest movements, right? But the reason we want to build up the chest is because it works synergistically, right? Meaning working with other muscles in the body to help us move. Okay, and stretching oftentimes, sort of the classic thing that we think about with flexibility is like, okay, I got to get flexible. All right, great. So I'm gonna pull one arm across my chest, and I'm gonna hold this here, and then I'll do the other one, and then maybe I do some neck stuff, and then the classic touch your toes. And so we do sort of this isolated stretching. And again, that's not a bad thing, especially if we are lengthening muscles that need it, right? But again, we're talking about getting ourselves moving, being healthy, being our most fit here. And if we just stick to those isolated stretches and we never figure out how to sort of integrate the stretching with movements, right, with our body's ability to move, well, I think it's detrimental. I think we cut ourselves short then. And so you guys heard me kind of use that word synergistically earlier, right? And again, the body moves in certain ways where some muscles are shortening, meaning they're contracting, and other muscles at the same time as some are shortening, the opposing muscles are lengthening, right? And this is how I like to approach a lot of our stretching exercises, right? And so, like I said, we had kind of that static, okay, I'm going to stretch my body out here, I'm going to hold it for 30 seconds. And then we have more active flexibility, or maybe like dynamic flexibility. PTs and fitness professionals refer to that as, in general, mobility, right? Being able to move through a range of motion, say like whether that's squatting or full range of motion while walking, but not just being able to move through it, but being able to move through it appropriately. And that's where sort of strength, flexibility, and all these things tie together to give us better mobility overall, okay? And so today we're going to talk about, like I said, more of that active flexibility. Any of you who have ever attended a power class, that's PWR, of course, the Parkinson's Wellness Recovery Program. One of the parts of that program is called flow, okay? Now, flow is a dynamic sort of chain of movements, okay? And these movements are chained together because they're helping us to sequence our movement patterns from standing to weight shifting to twisting and rotating to bending, right? It's tying movements together that sort of cross over in our day-to-day. And you'll see that even in like Big and Loud, kind of any of the major Parkinson's fitness programs, we have these sort of this sort of flow work, right? Flow yoga, flow Parkinson's yoga is another one that I have seen. And so we're going to stick to that, a similar theme there where we're kind of tying, doing one movement into the next. But again, it's going to be slow because the focus is stretching. With flow, that's a little bit more coordination, balance, right? It's kind of challenging our ability to manage, multiple movements in a very short span of time, without having to think about it. So we're going to utilize that idea of flow, but we're going to follow that into more of a stretch, okay? And so the first one we're going to start off with, and I'm going to start standing, and I will show some seated variations as well of each movement, okay? So I'm going to bend this down just a bit, just to make sure I can step back. Perfect, okay. So our first active stretch here, we're going to start standing. So first thing, always making sure I have good posture to start. I'm going to take my hands and I'm going to put my hands on my legs. So the first, I'm literally going into the power movement, okay? So my hands go on my legs. I'm pushing my butt back and I'm bending my knees here, okay? You can see I've squatted down almost like I'm down to a chair. Now, I'm going to power up really, really slow. As I power up, you're going to see me pull my arms back, right? Here's that power up exercise. But instead of doing it with a lot of speed, we're going to focus on squeezing my back, or squeezing our back muscles, okay, to pull the arms back, right? I'm trying to pinch those shoulder blades together. As I do that, I'm squeezing, shortening my back muscles to lengthen through my chest, right? This, out of all the stretches we do, this is probably one of the most important. There's another one where we're going to do a twist, a rotational stretch. This is super important because, again, what do we see with Parkinson's? That closed off, kind of hunched forward posture, right? Parkinson's is like aging on steroids, okay? And so we get this really round up forward posture, okay, which then leads to all kinds of issues with gait and just with our arm swing and all kinds of bad things, right? And so we're going to do the opposite, but we're not just going to stretch the arms, okay? Because if I just stretch without using those back muscles, right, I can get a stretch here, but I've got no engagement. I'm not working the muscles that will actively pull me back to open up my posture, okay? Here's that dynamic part that we're talking about. So I'm going to take those hands, I'm going to put them on my leg, I'm going to stand up as tall as I can, squeezing my butt and slowly pulling those arms back. I'm going to tuck my chin back here as well, and I'm squeezing those arms, or squeezing those back muscles and opening my arms as big as I can here, okay? Now, I've got my entire backside squeezing, engaging, sort of pulling me back, right? And as I'm doing that, you can see I'm getting this nice big stretch through the top front part of my trunk here, okay? So we're gonna go right from the bottom, come up, squeeze, squeeze, squeeze everything back, tuck that chin slightly down and back a little bit, and open those arms big, okay? Now, when doing this dynamic stretching, I like to hold those stretches, squeezing those muscles, about 10 to 15 seconds, okay? I think, you know, more than 10 is probably better, but again, you're gonna feel a lot of squeezing, a lot of muscles kind of burning back here, and so hold for as long as you can. Again, dynamic flexibility here. So I come down for a third one, and I'm gonna open up nice and big, tucking that chin, and opening that chest, and just getting that big stretch through my chest muscles here. Now, we're squeezing a lot of muscles here, so important that we breathe through the stretch, okay? Any of these exercises you do where we're engaging a large amount of muscle groups, we don't want to hold our breath. That Valsalva maneuver, right? Not good for blood pressure. Something we definitely want to avoid in fitness, especially as we age. So I'm back, I'm squeezing these muscles back here to pull me back up tall with good posture, but I'm breathing. And then, of course, I would come back down nice and slow, give myself a little breather, open up, and the same thing. Squeezing the back muscles together, right? Opening my arms nice and wide and breathing. Just like so. Okay, good. So that's our first major stretch. Again, one of the more important stretches. Why? Because we're getting a big stretch through that upper extremity, right? I talked about the body sort of working together. If we can get mobility through that trunk, through that upper body, we can stand up nice and tall, right? We're going to talk about rotation stretching next. If we can start to get that, you will see an increase in the length of your step, right? You're going to be able to walk a little bit smoother, hopefully take some of that shuffle away, because again, flexion just kind of begets more flexion, right? Here, my knees get bent. I'm kind of walking on my toes. We're going to open up big. We're going to try to move, and we're going to try to rotate as we walk, okay? Now, the second exercise, this stretch here, it's two parts, all righty? With this one, let's see here. Okay, so you guys won't be able to see my feet, but I'm going to have my feet pointing straight ahead here, okay? And again, I always want to focus on good tall posture, and I'm going to go back to this open arm position. Okay, I can be a bit more relaxed here. What I'm going to focus on is rotating my body over to get a big stretch right through the trunk here, okay? Now, I want you to keep your toes pointed forward, and as you're rotating one direction, you're going to feel that your hips and body are going to want to turn that way as well, okay? What we're going to focus on instead of letting those hips totally turn that direction, we're going to open up, we're going to bring our arms over as far as we can, and then I just want to try to make sure that I keep those hips straight ahead, okay? So I got my feet lined up, my toes are pointed straight ahead, And so I want my hips to kind of maintain that as well as I stretch through my trunk here. Now, that you might not be able to stretch all the way over and across and keep those hips turned, right? And that's okay. Go with where your mobility allows, okay? And remember, breathe through the exercise. So here we go. We're going to start with those arms open nice and wide. I'm going to breathe in. As I exhale, I'm going to rotate my trunk, bring those hands together. And now I feel my hips wanting to turn with the rotation, okay? I'm just going to slightly move those hips the opposite direction. I'm going to bring this down to show you guys that movement here. Okay, so I opened up here. You can see my hips want to turn, and I'm going to keep my trunk rotated, but try to keep those hips square, okay? And again, you're going to have some pull, and that's okay. I'm just trying to avoid this big major turn where my hips turn way open, okay? So keeping those feet square, opened up, rotate over, and then just slightly rotate those hips forward, okay? A little bit more of an isolated stretch through the trunk here. And we're going to hold this stretch again for about 10 to 15 seconds, okay? This rotation, we should feel a lot through our oblique muscles, right? Those muscles on the side that help us to rotate through. So we have contracting and then lengthening on the opposite side here. And then we would open back up, and we'll do the same thing to the other side. Again, going with where your mobility allows you to, trying to keep those hips as square as you can, and then keeping that trunk rotated. Now I'm staring at the camera, right? But really, I would be okay with our head moving with our trunk here, okay? Open back up, rotate that trunk, and let that head follow with. And we're holding this stretch through that trunk. Okay, so in addition to that movement where I'm keeping those hips square, and again, that is a little bit more isolated, right? Isolating that trunk. Now it's going to get a little bit more dynamic in terms of I'm going to do that stretch. I'm going to do the twist, but I'm going to go ahead and let those feet just rotate with as well, and then just pull as far as I can that opposite direction. So I open up nice and big here. Again, light stretch. I'm going to rotate that trunk, but I'm going to let the hips turn this time, okay, as much as they want. And then you can see here, my upper body is going to continue to rotate over, okay? Open back up nice and big, rotate over. Let's hold now and breathe. I know I might feel like I'm rushing through the stretches a little bit, but I just want to make sure I cover some of these really important basics, okay? Now, I'm going to lower the camera because I want you guys to be able to see my feet as I go through this drill here. So we're going to bring this right down to the ground here. Let's move this forward some. Okay, good. So we're going to open those arms nice and wide here. And again, with this stretch now, I'm rotating over, but you can see I'm letting those hips rotate, okay? Then I'm pulling those arms as far across and back around as I can to maintain that good stretch through this side here, okay? Now I've got this stretch coming through the side and then all the way down through, and you can see down into this leg here, this hip flexor is getting a nice stretch as well. So this entire side is lengthening in this rotation here. And I open back up, rotate, same thing on this side. And we're just holding that stretch and continually trying to rotate till we feel like we got that nice big stretch through this side here. Okay. Very good. All righty. So with those exercises from the seated position, what that would look like here. Again, very similar movements really. Bring my camera down just a bit more. But very similar from the seated position. I would have my hands on my legs. This is the first exercise I should remind everybody. I'd have my hands on my legs. I would bend forward. I would open my body up, squeezing those back muscles, and then allowing the chest to open up as those arms go back behind me, okay? So again, strengthening the backside as I am stretching through the front side. So that first stretch, very similar from the seated position. Obviously, I'm not standing, but I'm still actively trying to engage that backside to sort of prop myself up nice and tall. Now the twist stretch, that first one, right hips are going to stay nice and square, open up, rotate my trunk over as far as I can, pulling my hand across, my arm across if needed, and just trying to keep those hips square, okay? Like I said, a little bit of an isolated stretch through the trunk here. And we do the same, of course, on the opposite side, trying to keep the hips square and keeping that rotation. And then the second version of that, remember I talked about moving those feet? Well, I can do that same thing, right? I can rotate in my chair here. I'll bring this down a little bit just so everybody can see. Okay, so you're going to see me rotate those legs in my chair. I'm doing that same thing, right? I'm still getting some lengthening through this side here, and if I wanted to, I could even push this leg back if I feel comfortable, you know, with that type of balance in a chair here, and then rotate my trunk across to the opposite side here. Of course, then I would open back up, rotate, and again, you can see I've twisted those hips, and I'm pulling those arms a little bit further, right, to stretch through this side here. And if I feel so inclined, my balance feels strong, I can straighten this back leg out as I rotate here. Now I'm getting a really nice lengthening all the way down through this side, down into the hips here. Okay? So I would say those are, fix my camera again here, everybody. Those are kind of the main core stretches that I think would be most important for Parkinson's. And again, the reason being is because one, they're working on taking this out of flexion, right? So this here, so it's opening us up, and it's not just the stretch, but it's the strengthening as well, okay? We want those back muscles to be able to pull us back, and obviously we need that chest that has probably become kind of tight and shortened from being in this position chronically. We need that to open up and lengthen as well, okay? And then as I mentioned, the twist stretches, right? Those stretches through the trunk, those are important as well because that rigidity, right? We get that stiffness in our trunk as we are moving. And when we can rotate our bodies, right? When we can rotate and move well, it's going to increase our stability and our step length as well, okay? And so to break free from that rigid movement, right, we want to twist the trunk, okay? And again, we over-exaggerate all our movements, right? I was really opening up super big here, and I was really twisting my body over. The reason that I do that, and the reason being because, again, you know, I mentioned this at the last seminar, actually, is Parkinson's, you know, in terms of movement, it brings us here, right? Short steps, soft voice, kind of all the classic symptoms maybe that we talk about, right? And what we're doing is we're going all the way over here with our movements. We're taking bigger steps than we would. We're doing bigger stretches. We're being louder than we would on a day-to-day basis, right? And that's to bring it back to more of a normal in the middle, okay? So Parkinson's, that pendulum swings this way in terms of our physical activity and, you know, our movements, right? It really slows us down. So even in things like our stretching, we're going above and beyond what would be maybe considered like a normal stretch to help bring us back into the middle here, okay? Okay, just one more thing before I take any questions, and that is, okay, so I do this dynamic flexibility, right? Well, what about like the classic static stretching? You know, you guys probably all done fitness classes where you end the class with, you know, some stretching like this here, right? Working on some neck rotation, maybe some extension, some flexion, things like that, pulling the arms across. I think that is fantastic still, okay? Where I would like to see that static stretching in place would be more towards the end of your exercise routine, okay? And that's where things can get a little bit more personal for you, okay? Obviously, everybody's a little bit different. So you go through these big Parkinson's, the flow exercises, the power up, the fast, high pace. We do the dynamic flexibility, right? Now the body is warm and it's sort of been moving in a way that's working together. Now we can kind of go, okay, I need to do some isolated stretching on my right side, right? Or I need to work a little bit more neck lateral flexion here. As you guys can see, my neck's pretty stiff, so I should probably do some more of that myself. But those are the things that we want to focus on when it comes to static stretching, right? Maybe you do have, really tight hamstrings or really tight like quadriceps. So at the end of those fitness sessions, whether it's at a class or at home, then focus on, what is most relevant to you in terms of static stretching. What needs a little extra love, so to speak, right? Okay. And with that here, we've got a few minutes left here. Is there any questions at all that anyone would have? I know Melanie was on directing, but I think she might be into another meeting. So let me check the chat here. Okay, yes. Okay, so with that being said, I will end early here. If anyone does have any questions throughout the seminar about the stretching and the things that we talked about, please let me know. And in about 5 minutes here, we'll have our next presenter at 11. Okay, thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you, Zach. We're going to turn it over now to Julie Fields. The topic of her talk is staying healthy and happy with positive cognitive health habits. So I will turn it over to Julie.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be here with you today to talk about ways to stay healthy and happy with positive cognitive health habits. Here's an outline of what I'll be talking about. I wanted to help you understand the spectrum of normal aging to dementia before I focus on the specific cognitive impairments that, when present, are the most common in Parkinson's disease. I'll spend just a brief amount of time talking about the pharmacologic interventions for cognitive impairment that exist, but then I'll spend the rest of the time talking about non-pharmacologic interventions that have evidence to support their benefit. These will center around particular pillars, so to speak, that support the foundation for healthy brain activity. And then lastly, I'll tell you about some of the recommendations that have been offered by a multidisciplinary group of experts. So first, let's talk about the spectrum of aging to dementia. One of the most feared consequences of Parkinson's disease is cognitive decline and impairment. And this is a justifiable concern, as a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, which I'll start referring to as MCI, or dementia, has a broad impact. We know that as cognitive impairment increases, one's ability to function independently starts to decline. And with that, there is increased dependence on caregivers. The net effect is that patients and caregivers experience emotional distress, which leads to declines in physical health and increased economic burden, which then leads to further emotional distress and declines in physical health. Without intervention, this vicious cycle continues. Early intervention for the delay or prevention of cognitive impairment can help stop this trajectory, or at the very least, hopefully minimize the consequences. Now, how we function cognitively occurs on a continuum. Of course, not everybody moves completely from one end of the continuum to the other, meaning that not everyone ultimately develops cognitive impairment and dementia. But when there is movement, there tends to be a progression towards decline. Now, the arrows below the continuum represent transition periods from one stage to the next. And you can see that there's overlap between normal cognition and MCI, and similarly between MCI and dementia. Sometimes people hover in a stage and never advance, whereas others may return to a previous stage and remain there. When this happens, it's usually explained by the impact of life stressors, medications, depression, or other factors that interfere with cognition. Still others progress along the entire continuum, which raises concern for a pathologic condition. Most people do experience cognitive changes as they age. Here are some of the more typical things that we see. For example, it's normal to be a bit slower in our thinking processes, especially if they're more complex, such as with making decisions and solving problems. In our younger years, we seem to be able to do multiple things at once. But as we've gotten older, it's become a little more challenging to divide our attention and juggle as many things simultaneously. We also have a tendency to be more rigid in our thinking and less able to adapt to new ideas. You can think of this as sort of being stuck in our ways. Even some degree of memory decline is normal, such as having a more difficult time remembering names or putting a name to a face or remembering exact dates. We may also more frequently find that we've gone into a room but forgotten why. It's not normal aging anymore, though, when problems become more pronounced and start to interfere with daily functioning. For example, repeating oneself or having problems completing tasks that previously were accomplished without difficulty, problems learning and remembering new information, or difficulties with language, such as processing what we hear or finding words when we're speaking. In MCI, there's a cognitive complaint, and this can be from anyone, such as a spouse, a child, a care provider. The person's general cognitive functioning is relatively normal, but there are declines on objective testing that are greater than would be expected for age or background. However, these changes are not at a level that the person's ability to carry out typical daily activities are significantly affected. Dementia, on the other hand, involves clear and significant cognitive decline relative to previous levels of functioning. The problems are present in one or more domains, and they are significant enough to get in the way of an individual carrying out some or many daily activities independently. Now, relative to my topic today, 25 to 30% of individuals with Parkinson's have MCI. Another roughly 25 to 30% have dementia, and that figure increases to 75% in people over or after having the disease for 10 years. Excuse me. In 2016, the Parkinson's Disease Foundation convened a multidisciplinary panel that included experts in neurology, psychology, and neuropsychology, myself included, physical therapy, nutrition, nursing, social work, and ethics and gerontology. Several patients with Parkinson's, along with their care partners, were also invited to attend. Now, the mission of the working group was to address maintaining cognitive functioning in Parkinson's disease, and more specifically, to define the unmet needs related to cognitive changes, to review evidence for non-pharmacologic interventions to maintain cognitive health, and then to use the information they learned to provide recommendations to not only persons with Parkinson's and their care partners, but also to help inform healthcare professionals with regard to addressing cognition in their patients as early as diagnosis. During this symposium, one of the questions asked of patients and their care partners was what was one thing they wished they had known about cognition in Parkinson's disease. A person with Parkinson's shared, "I wish that they had stated that it was a possibility and discussed more about it. I only got information on the motor symptoms." A care partner said, "I wish that the doctor might have mentioned some changes to be watchful for so I could be more aware and helpful." These responses help illustrate the need to provide more information regarding the cognitive changes experienced throughout the course of the disease. They also gave us a picture of how the decline in cognition affected their daily lives. So, for example, one of the individuals with Parkinson's told us, "Sometimes my brain freezes up, kind of like my legs sometimes do. Finding the words I want to say is very hard, and my thoughts seem like they are blank." A care partner said, "The most bothersome is attention, which we call chasing rabbits at our house. Early on, this manifested as flitting from task to task without completion. However, cognitive symptoms have started to affect communication, which in turn affects our relationship. My husband's frustration in turn sparks irritation in both of us. I sometimes wonder if the same is not occurring with friends and they are too polite to tell me." A healthy brain requires many cognitive processes. However, even though we speak about them as if they're discrete domains, they're actually connected and dependent on one another in some way. So let me talk briefly about each of these domains. First, we have to be able to engage attention and then hold the information in our mind while we work with it. We also need to be able to disengage and shift attention to the next issue at hand when the situation demands. Processing speed is how quickly we take in information, work with it, and provide some kind of output, such as how quickly we understand and respond to a question we've been asked, or how quickly we react in a traffic situation. Attention and processing speed really underlie the efficiency and success of all other cognitive processes. Executive functions are important for those higher order cognitive skills that involve things such as problem solving, decision making, reasoning and judgment, and flexible thinking. These are particularly important for complex daily activities. Now, most people think of language in terms of speaking, but it also involves being able to understand and process what we see and hear. It is particularly important for communication, and this includes not just verbal responses, but also comprehension of nonverbal cues, such as the meaning behind a scowl or a raised eyebrow. Visual spatial skills help us make sense out of what we see. So in this picture here under visual spatial, do you see people or do you see columns? Do we see objects and scenes as a whole, or are we only able to see individual details, causing us to have a distorted perception? Can we identify an object in order to use it properly, such as recognizing a key or a remote control? Can we judge spatial distance so that we don't rear end the car in front of us when we're driving? Memory involves the retrieval of information. One type is called declarative memory, which is things that we can talk about, such as an event that happened, the date something happened, or who we were with when it happened. The second type is implicit memory, also known as procedural memory, and this involves the how-to, such as completing a task without having to consciously tell ourselves how to do it. Examples of this would be things like brushing our teeth or using the telephone. Finally, motor skills are important for coordination and movement and affect most things that we do. For example, how we manipulate objects with our hands or write, or walk without losing our balance. In Parkinson's disease, the processes most affected early on typically involve attention, processing speed, and executive functioning. Language, visual-spatial processing, and learning and memory may or may not be affected early on, but usually are more affected when or if cognitive impairment progresses to dementia. This is because of several neurotransmitters, but particularly the loss of dopamine, depicted here in blue, which is the primary culprit for causing the motor symptoms in Parkinson's. And this affects brain regions particularly sensitive to attention, processing speed, and executive functioning. Now, I'm going to switch gears and talk just briefly about the medications that have been tested and approved for cognition in Parkinson's. There currently are no disease-modifying drugs for cognitive impairment in Parkinson's. There are several that are being used experimentally for MCI, but none are FDA approved. Rivastigmine is FDA approved in Parkinson's dementia, but primarily for symptom management, such as for treating mood disorders or behavioral disturbance or sleep disorders. So not directly for cognitive symptoms, but there can be some indirect impact by controlling the symptoms that can have a negative impact on cognition. Some of the cholinesterase inhibitors have been used off-label and have shown possible benefit, but they are not FDA approved either. Still, other medications that are used to treat Parkinsonian symptoms can actually cause problems with cognition in some respects. So it's clear that medications are not the key and that we need to seek other avenues to benefit cognitive health and happiness. So let's see what non-pharmacologic behavioral interventions have to offer. I like to use the house analogy when I talk about brain health. A house has a foundation and supporting structures that, if properly maintained, will provide a sound living environment for years to come. The pillars of brain health are the strengths and supports that keep the mind and body whole and working together. And similar to the structure of a house, they need to be maintained in order to function into old age. For many of you here, one or more of these supports may be weak. Our goal is to do what we can to strengthen the weak supports and to maintain the intact ones in order to compensate should one of the other pillars give way. A healthy brain makes good use of the internal as well as the external environment and allows them to interact with one another to shape thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Here are the 5 pillars I'm going to talk about that have evidence to support brain health. The first is cognitive exercise. Staying mentally healthy, staying mentally active strengthens the neurons and connections. And contrary to what used to be thought, recent evidence suggests that we can even generate new brain cells. There's been a lot of hype about brain training exercises, and there's a rapidly growing market for them. But do they actually work? This is a meta-analysis reviewing studies designed to assess the impact of cognitive training in individuals with Parkinson's. The studies used either computer-based or paper and pencil tests, or a combination of both, which were administered 2 to 3 times per week for 30 to 90 minutes each session. And the total training time per individual had to be at least 4 hours. Overall, there were large and significant improvements in working memory, processing speed, and executive functioning. So in the areas that we know are especially important, Parkinson's. Smaller positive effects were found in other cognitive domains, as well as mood and quality of life, although these generally were not statistically significant. Excuse me. More recently, another systematic review examined the effects of cognitive training in individuals with Parkinson's who either had MCI or dementia. In contrast to the previous meta-analysis, this review did not find significant improvements in cognition after 4 to 8 weeks of cognitive training. However, one of the larger trials in this review, which included 70 individuals with Parkinson's with or without MCI, found improved short-term and working memory after 6 weeks in the intervention group. And of the 47 who followed up a year later, the group that received the intervention showed improved global cognition. But perhaps more importantly, the group that did not get the intervention had an increased risk of MCI, 40% as compared to 18% in the intervention group. So the bottom line is that you should stimulate your brain. It could help you, and it certainly isn't going to hurt you. The more challenging, the better, and the more novel, the better. Also, choose something enjoyable, particularly if you do it with a partner or friend, and this will increase the likelihood that you'll keep doing it. Now on to the second pillar of brain health, physical exercise. There's no dispute, excuse me, that physical exercise protects brain cells against toxins and damage. But there's also plenty of evidence supporting the benefit of physical exercise on cognitive functioning in normal aging. The physical health benefits are also numerous, including controlling many conditions that are associated with cognitive decline, such as high blood pressure, stroke, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, depression. But can the physical exercise protect against cognitive decline in Parkinson's disease, or further decline when MCI is already present? Here's another systematic review that gathered data from trials that involved various forms of physical exercise in individuals with mild to moderate stage Parkinson's disease who either did or did not have MCI. The people randomized to get the intervention engaged in moderate to high intensity exercise 2 to 3 times per week for 40 to 90 minutes per session. The non-intervention control group engaged in unsupervised exercise at a mild to moderate intensity, in addition to lectures and group education. What they found was that the intervention group showed improvements in global cognition, processing speed, sustained attention, and mental flexibility immediately following the intervention. So again, areas of cognition sensitive to decline in Parkinson's. And this was especially true for Tango that had been adapted for Parkinson's, as well as for a WeFit cognitive plus motor training combination, and for the treadmill. In fact, using the treadmill 3 times per week for 60 minutes over 24 weeks resulted in the greatest improvement in cognition. There were only 2 studies that presented follow-up data, ranging from 2 to 3 months following the intervention, and these showed small effects for global cognition. In terms of cognition and mind-body movement, yoga and meditation have been shown to improve concentration and memory in healthy adults. And there's also evidence of a positive impact on brain structure. Research focusing on caregivers of dementia who have engaged in yoga and or meditation practices shows reduction in depression, as well as improvements in mental health and cognitive functioning in the caregivers. There have been few studies, however, examining cognition specifically in Parkinson's patients. However, there does appear to be evidence of improvements in physical functioning, as well as mood and quality of life. Similarly, Tai Chi and Qi Gong have been shown to be effective for improving motor functioning, depression, and quality of life. But a systematic review looking at these didn't reveal any benefit for cognition. For further information on these studies, I've included some references at the end of this presentation. So based on these studies, it's recommended that you engage in some form of physical activity, and 45 to 60 minutes 3 times per week falls within the range that showed an effect on cognition. Of course, always be aware of and stay within your physical limitations. And again, participating with a friend will make it much more enjoyable and likely that you'll stick with it. The third pillar of brain health is a healthy diet. Good nutrition is necessary for optimal health in general, but is there any evidence that a healthy diet improves cognition, and specifically cognition in Parkinson's disease? In studies in non-Parkinson's disease populations, foods such as blueberries, cocoa, dark chocolate, tea, wine show promise for protecting against cognitive decline. There are also health benefits of the Mediterranean and DASH diets. The MIND diet, which is the Mediterranean DASH intervention for neurodegenerative delay, has been associated with reduced risk of Alzheimer's disease, and also, more specifically, with less decline in global cognition, processing speed, and executive functioning compared to a traditional diet. So it's not surprising then, since this pattern of cognition is a theme you should recognize by now, that the MIND diet is also associated with a reduction in the risk of developing Parkinson's or progression of symptoms. The fourth pillar of brain health is social activity and emotional wellness. Remaining socially active makes physical and mental activity more enjoyable and reduces stress levels, which helps maintain healthy connections among brain cells. In a large study of over 10,000 individuals, 13% of whom had MCI, the risk of mortality was greater in those with low and medium levels of social engagement, but this was not found in the high engagement groups. In another study measuring cognition and social engagement in 525 individuals with Parkinson's disease, there was an increased risk of dementia with age, but also with low levels of recent social engagement. What this tells us is that socialization is good for the brain. It decreases stress and improves mood. Furthermore, social interaction is cognitively stimulating. And an old but often true saying, laughter is the best medicine, so don't forget to laugh. The last pillar of brain health is sleep. Good restorative sleep cannot be overemphasized. It soothes and rejuvenates. It improves mood and increases stress tolerance. And it improves attention and helps consolidate memories. Poor sleep negatively impacts cognition not only in healthy individuals, but especially in those with a neurodegenerative disease. Now, up to 98% of patients with Parkinson's disease have sleep disorders. A meta-analysis of 16 papers that reported on sleep and cognition in Parkinson's found a significant effect of poor sleep on measures of memory and executive functioning. Although the specific mechanisms for this were not clearly identified in these studies, this highlights the important role of restorative sleep in further combating the cognitive consequences of neurodegenerative processes. Here are some ways to help maintain your sleep or to build healthy sleep habits. Exercising early in the day, limiting napping, avoiding excessive caffeine, alcohol, or nicotine, particularly near bedtime, and limiting liquid intake to 2 to 3 hours before bedtime if frequent urination is a problem. In the evening, taking time to wind down and relax the daily tensions before going to bed. Establishing a nighttime routine, waiting to go to bed until you're sleepy, and reserving the bedroom for sleep and intimacy are some strategies to promote good sleep. It also helps to control your sleeping environment, such as temperature and light control. If after all of this you still have problems with sleep, it may be appropriate to try more structured strategies. Cognitive behavioral therapy can help with maladaptive learned behaviors, so things like excessive worrying or conditioned fears around sleep. progressive muscle relaxation, which involves sequential relaxing of muscles from the head to toe, or biofeedback that teaches relaxation using adaptive feedback can be helpful for some people. Other relaxation techniques include visualizing peaceful settings or meditation. And when all else fails, see your doctor to rule out a sleep disorder or to see if medication is warranted. I hope by now that you're seeing that really it is not any single component of behavior that will provide clear or lasting benefit for cognitive health. Undoubtedly, the 5 pillars of health that I spoke about, cognitive and physical exercise, a healthy diet, social activity and emotional wellness, and sleep, have a synergistic effect. Support for this notion comes from yet another meta-analysis of multi-component non-pharmacologic interventions that showed not only a delay in institutionalizations of persons with Alzheimer's and related dementias, but also that the effects on cognition, activities of daily living, behavior, and mood were similar to the effects of medication. Finally, what are the recommendations for individuals with Parkinson's disease and their care partners? I apparently love systematic reviews. I promise this is the last one, but it's an important one. The National Academies of Sciences commissioned experts to review randomized controlled trials for interventions designed to prevent cognitive decline and dementia and evaluate their efficacy. While they found insufficient evidence to justify, quote, an assertive public health campaign to encourage people to adopt them for the purpose of preventing cognitive decline and dementia, unquote, they did find evidence to support 3 classes of intervention. These included cognitive training, blood pressure management in people with hypertension, and increased physical activity. They also concluded that more work in this realm was clearly needed. So here are the recommendations from the Parkinson's Disease Foundation work group. For early and mid-stage Parkinson's disease, exercise according to guidelines from the American College of Sports Medicine and American Heart Association. Stay socially active. For example, spend time with friends or join a support group. Engage in cognitive training exercises, such as computerized speeded tasks of attention or other challenging cognitive exercises. Learn coping strategies. For example, work with an occupational therapist or a neuropsychologist on techniques for paying attention, remembering things, or doing everyday tasks. Eat a nutritious diet, for example, the Mediterranean diet. Take your time when performing tasks. Let your family and friends know if you're having trouble, and seek help if you're feeling depressed or anxious. For advanced Parkinson's disease, keep all of the above recommendations for the earlier stages, plus develop a highly structured daily routine that you follow. This may necessitate the systematic use of a daily planner, for example. Consider the use of medication for cognitive impairment. Have an advanced directive in place, such as a living well, or how your treatments will be managed. And for care partners, taking care of your own physical and emotional health. So seeing your doctor is needed and seeking social support and counseling will help keep you in a state where you can provide the best care for your loved one. So I'll end here and thank you for your attention. And I will be back later to answer any questions should you have any.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Fields, for all of that expert advice. It was very, very helpful in thinking about cognitive health and things that we can do for that. And again, had some of those general themes that we've been talking about throughout the series. We will be back with Dr. Fields at the end during that roundtable. So I again encourage you, any questions that might have brought up that you would like addressed or to go into a little bit more depth, please go ahead and drop those in the Q&A. All right, well, I'm going to give you a couple of minute break. Please don't drop, come right back. But it's a great time, 11:20, we might be starting to get hungry or need those medications, or just get up and stretch again. And so please do that, get up and stretch. Stay tuned, we'll be back at about 11:25, so just about 3 minutes, and with Holly Brown from the Elder Network. So come right back in a few minutes. Holly Brown to the next presentation. Holly is a caregiver, respite and companion care program coordinator, as well as the transportation manager at the Elder Network here in Rochester, Minnesota. She has been with the Elder Network for 13 years. She's been a great partner of ExercisAbilities during most of that time for the past 10 years. And she has a bachelor degree in social work, as well as many certifications to work with family caregivers. Holly facilitates caregiver support groups, one-on-one coaching sessions, and educational workshops with a special focus on caregivers. And so Holly, go ahead and join in here, and Annie will bring your slides up and take it away.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. Welcome to our third series. And today I wanted to focus on family meetings and really how they can be helpful and beneficial throughout our stages of life. So let's jump right in to the purpose. So for most, really, there should be a purpose of why we want to get together. And with family meetings, there are multiple purposes, as you can see here. For one, it really can help build understanding for what's really going on with not only the care receiver, but also their caregivers. It also can help improve communication and sharing of ideas of what's needed, and also giving an opportunity for that caregiver to talk about the responsibilities that they've been doing and how they might need some help. And then really focusing on finding solutions to those caregiver needs and ideas, and working through some of the tough decisions that need to be talked about and made for future. Some want to know, when should I really be doing this? So next slide. As early as a need arises. Family meetings should really not just be done one time, one done and move on. It's really whenever there's a change with the care receiver's health, or even the caregiver's ability might need to change, whether it's temporary or long-term. So they do say family meetings should be held early to discuss things that might come up, but then also whenever a need does arise. Okay, next slide. When considering about hosting a family meeting, really we should be including all individuals who are providing support, no matter how far or near they are, or their ability to connect, whether it's on Zoom, whether on the phone, in person, by email. It's really important to get everyone involved so everyone feels that their voice can be heard, they can share in ideas of what maybe they're thinking is a need, or even how they can help. So as this slide is, showing, it could be all family members, friends, neighbors, professionals, or really anyone who's in your tribe to help support you guys going forward. So here are some things to keep in mind before the actually hosting the meeting. For one, again, what's the purpose? What do we hope to accomplish? It's important to gather all medical records, community resources, so that these can all be discussed at the meeting. Also, it's important before the actual meeting that each person make a list of concerns or issues that they want to be discussed based on the goals of the care receiver and caregiver. You want to invite all individuals involved in the care of this care receiver. And then it's best to put out when would be the best time, place, and date that works for most. And for those who can't be there in person, really consider a conference call or a Zoom so that they can still be a part of the conversation. And for some families, you know, having a facilitator there may be helpful to keep the conversation on track. Sometimes it can, you know, not go as planned. Things can get said that make it difficult, kind of focusing on the past and maybe not the future. We do, you know, say it's important to, excuse me, include the care receiver. And so sometimes with that, people are also afraid to really speak honestly because they don't want to offend or hurt feelings. But this is a safe place to really share information, share those concerns, and if needed, really talk about the next steps and who's going to help and do what. So sometimes a facilitator is unbiased and can be there just to offer support, keep things on track, and just make sure that no one is feeling left out. Next slide. So say you have all those things taken care of. You've picked a time and a date, you've included all the individuals, everybody's had ample time to prepare a list of things they want shared. They send it off either to the host and or if you're choosing to use a professional, your list gets sent to them in advance so they have time to prepare and organize to help keep the family on track. We do say that, you know, when possible, please invite your care receiver. These meetings are about them. And so they should be included to hear what things are being talked about on their behalf and for their benefit. It's important also to keep the first agenda small. So this ensures that all issues will get full attention. You may want to ask someone to take notes on what's been discussed, assignment of tasks and follow-up items, so that if people are interested in being more part of the solution than just the conversation, they can take ownership and help that caregiver out. So designating a note taker is really important to make sure that all issues do get documented. And then it's important to, you know, review the agenda, discuss what's most important, and then move forward. So that might be the professional's job or even the host's jobs to say, these are the items that came in from all family members or persons of support. And so we want to make sure we cover all these things. There may be some things on the list that multiple people mentioned. Those to me would be your priority topics. Then after touching on those topics, it's important to reach a sense of closure on each issue. Does it need to be taken care of now, or is it maybe for a future meeting or conversation? Not everything that gets brought up at the first meeting needs to be addressed right away. And that's why it is important to have an agenda and have that note taker and have the ability to assess what is the most important as we move forward. After you've touched base on each issue, it's important to create a plan, like I said, on what needs to be done next. Maybe there are individuals within the group that are happy to step up and take ownership. I've heard a lot of long distance caregivers are happy to do the resource navigation of services because a lot of it can be done online. Some are willing to help with the finances because they can do that remotely. Others who are there in person may take on the respite approach. I can come one day a week for a couple hours and give that primary caregiver a break. Or maybe they can, you know, stop by and do groceries or take them the garbage out once a week. So I think it's important to determine, you know, who can do what if it's possible. And then if a plan B is needed, to discuss that also. You want to create a spokesperson who will be able to follow up with all of the individuals who were involved and also not able to be there, so that they can still feel included in what was discussed and what is the current plan moving forward. And if needed, certainly feel free to plan the next meeting. Some family meetings that I have been a part of, we have given it like 2 weeks, and then we come back around and see what was found, whether it was research or just more pondering of next steps, who can do what. Others have done more of a 1 month to 6 week turnaround. So, it just depends on what you and your family dynamic needs to do and how quickly the turnaround. I've also had some that have done it within a week's time frame, just because of the urgency of the need. So just keep in mind that whenever there is a change, in again, that care receiver or caregiver's ability, please consider circling back around with your team to discuss those changes so that everyone is on the same page and everyone understands what is happening. I'm sure for some of you, if you've kind of been doing the care partner caregiving on your own, family and friends don't really understand or really know what it all takes to be successful in helping someone else stay healthy and age successfully. And when they do get involved, it can be quite awakening to how and what is really needed. And I feel when they're given that opportunity to be a part of more of the hands-on solution, you are going to hopefully receive more support from them in the future and others, because now they're getting a glimpse of what it's really like and what it's been for both the care receiver and caregiver who are dealing with these changes as time goes on. Let's see. The outcomes of the family meeting can really be a multitude. So for one, we really want and hope that the care receiver is willing to accept more help from others beyond that caregiver, primary caregiver, whether it's a spouse or a partner or a family member. We also want to make sure that everyone feels heard and validated in these family meetings. This is one of the key, I would say, purposes of a family meeting, is it's a safe place for people to come and talk and really share their concern and be heard without feeling alienated, without feeling that their opinion doesn't matter. We know some of the topics that need to be discussed at family meetings can be very, very difficult. Some of the crucial conversation topics, as I like to call them, could be getting those legal forms in order. Who does the care receiver and caregiver want as that power of attorney, if needed? And whether it's financial or medical. Maybe there is that living will that needs to be put in place. And who do we want included, and what do we want included? Those are not easy decisions just to be made overnight. So sometimes a family meeting can be really helpful in terms of discussing what really needs to go on those forms. Maybe some of one another crucial conversation would be having joint accounts. Do we want to add an individual or individuals to the checking account to help with bills and other just such, day-to-day utilities and things like that, making sure their names are on those accounts so that if something happened to the caregiver unexpectedly, you've got someone in your tribe who can step up and call that biller and say, this person is been ill and I'm going to step in and I'm their power of attorney, or I'm on their account now. It's so good to be thinking about the things that might occur just so that you're not left in panic and crisis. One of the other crucial conversation topics is long-term housing. What does that really look like? Where do we want to see ourselves in 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20? This may be very different for the care receiver versus the tribe and even the caregiver. One of the things I've found to be really helpful when I am meeting a family for the first time and I do get to sit with that care receiver and get to know them, I talk about their long-term goal. Tell me what it looks like to stay here. And tell me what would need to happen in order for you to consider making a move. How would you know when you're ready? And sometimes their answers can be very revealing if we give them the time and the respect to answer. And I've heard the gamut. I've heard, well, if it's I no longer can drive, I'll make a move. If I no longer can walk the steps, I'll make a move. If it's that I'm going to need total personal care, I will make a move. If my care receiver partner can no longer provide for me, I would make that move. I don't want to burden my family. So I am considering that. On the other hand, I've had folks say, I'm staying right here to the end. And I then ask them, well, tell me what that would look like in order for you to do that successfully, considering your health conditions that you have today. And sometimes this is kind of where they pause. They might not really know what they will need, and they may not really know what they will be willing to accept. So just describing and explaining to them, okay, well, to stay home successfully, that might mean that you have to get some home health in here. Or maybe beyond home health, it turns into hospice care. And with a great team of professionals and your family support, you can do that successfully. So it's really hearing them and validating where they're coming from so that they continue to want to share their thoughts, their wishes. And this is a crucial conversation to have. Now, don't confuse this with somebody who has already been experiencing late stages of dementia and or any, I guess, condition that is affecting their cognition to make decisions or be an accurate recorder of themselves. Because if you have a family meeting at this stage in the game, we still want you to have your care receiver there, but just know that they may not get the final answer, okay? But they should be included at least in the conversation. Some of the other things, crucial conversations is, again, who can help when it is needed? Who's going to be able to do what to really make this the most successful family meeting possible, and to understand what each person's role might be. You may choose a family meeting that is more conversational and just bringing up topics and getting everybody aware of what it's been like at the current stage of the health condition or the caregiver's ability. Or like I said, you may be really looking for some solutions to some concerns or issues that have come up, maybe regarding safety, maybe driving, maybe falls, wandering, just maybe even a big change in personality where there may be some paranoia or hallucinations happening, and that is really changing the dynamic between the caregiver and the care receiver. So no matter what's going on, these family meetings are a place to come together, talk openly, but then also find solution and move forward. In ending, and I know this was pretty quick, but this will give you guys maybe a little bit more of a lunch break. One of the things that I wanted to just throw out there was there was a 2020 movie, or not movie, but a video that was put out in 2014, and it was called the Crucial Conversation Project. And you can Google it and watch it. And it's a great video of a family who was interviewed. And it really just shows a very more laid back and positive type of family meeting. They just chose to do it around a day that they were going to do like a potluck and a birthday party, and just sit down with dad and talk about his wishes and be open. And it was multi-generational, which is a really good viewpoint also to not forget, is getting your younger family members involved, because we are seeing our younger generation helping with our caregiving over time. We're seeing a lot more intergenerational living together. I know in my own family, my son moved in with my dad when he became ill, just as an extra person there. And it was a beautiful relationship that got to be explored. And if we wouldn't have had that opportunity, you know, I don't think my son would have gotten as close to my dad as he did. And so what a beautiful relationship builder it could also be. So we don't want to forget our younger adults in this caregiving role and family meeting. They've got great insight. They've got a good way at looking at things. It's also important for them to talk about their wishes that they might want in case something happens to them, which can really be eye-opening. Do we even know what family members, you know, are donors? Do we even know who wants to be, say, for end of life, you know, buried in a casket or cremated, even want a funeral? You know, all those types of things are hard to talk about, but so important, just so that when the time comes, it's not a scary topic. It's, oh, we've discussed this. It's going to be okay. We know this is a part of life. And it's more important to have each individual be able to really share what their wishes are, so the family isn't feeling overwhelmed and afraid that they've made the wrong decision in the end because they didn't know, they didn't ask. And now they're hoping that they're doing the right thing by that family member. So as you can see, lots of benefits from hosting a family meeting. If you're in the southeastern, you know, Minnesota area, and you're looking to host a family meeting, or you want more information, you can certainly reach out to me. I have my email there. I have my phone number on the screen, 285-5272. I'd be happy to share information or even, you know, help facilitate if that was something that was needed. But I hope all of you have taken away a good nugget of information. And again, if you're interested in learning more, you can always even Google family meetings. The Minnesota Board on Aging has put together a very nice brochure, which also talks about the things I discussed today. So good luck, and please reach out if we can be of some support. Thank you for joining.
Well, thank you, Holly. So I have a couple of things that I can follow up on that I think the audience might enjoy. You mentioned that you could help if they're here in Southeast Minnesota. I don't know, even if they're not, if they're from somewhere else, they probably could email you and get some advice. But are there other centers or places throughout the country, maybe in major metropolitans, that could be a first stop resource, at least to get started and call? And other states that are similar to what you provided, Elder Network?
Well, I would say I'd recommend people checking in with their senior linkage lines, or even at their county with social workers, public health. They would probably have a list also of coaches and facilitators. I know family counselors will do family meetings. Sometimes the family dynamic can be pretty intense. And so having the right kind of professional facilitate will be important. So somebody who has a background in family dynamic, working with certain maybe health issues, maybe it's mental illness, or maybe it's, you know, the Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. I would say definitely start with your county support, your senior linkage lines, and then they should be able to connect you, hopefully, in your community to the right folks.
Yeah, great, great. So, at least in Minnesota, we have the aging Minnesota AAAs, that the aging associations that run those senior linkage lines, and they're really valuable. And I think it's a resource that not everybody realizes that is there, but there is a senior linkage line that you can look up and get that information from, and call, and they're a wealth of information, at least here in Minnesota. Yeah, and then one other thing came to my mind as you were talking, and you just mentioned it, that even in my own family, I watched my parents with their aging parents and their siblings, and that dynamic that can be so difficult and scary. And so just how to overcome that. It's almost a fear, right? It's a fear of having that conversation even start, because of fear of, maybe I think I'm doing more than what they're doing, and then finger pointing might come out of this meeting. But what you presented was just wonderful. And if everybody can come around the table with an open mind and have the conversation focused on mom or dad or grandma or grandpa, that's the best way. So kind of speak to overcoming that initial barrier of how difficult and scary it might be to even speak up and say, hey, can we get together?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Melanie. And I have had, say, a caregiver who I've been working with, and they decide, we really need to have a family meeting, and I want to share the information you've provided with them. But I'm really nervous because there's been a lot of past hurts. There's been favoritism potentially witnessed or whatnot. Sometimes it's really helpful for, say, those individuals to talk to me first, have a one-on-one coaching session first about the fears and how we're going to overcome that, and how, this is a great place to kind of let the past be the past and move forward and focus on who is the focus of this meeting. It's not about the siblings and what they're maybe struggling with, but it's really, okay, I know that there's been past issues, but let's come together for dad's sake. Let's only focus on him today. We really want him to feel like we're in his corner. It's difficult, but I would say, you kind of take it in steps. And if the people who are maybe invited, who wouldn't feel like they can be honest, like I said, I would encourage them to reach out to the caregiver coach or the facilitator one-on-one, and really just help work through those personal issues that they're having, so that when they come to the group setting, they can actually be focused in the right way on the right person and not make it about them. And I suggest that even with folks that are dealing with crisis, in my mind, because they come and they're overwhelmed and they just need to talk. I encourage them to do the one-on-one coaching compared to starting a support group, because sometimes in the support group, you have that person who might manipulate most of the time, and not on purpose. They just have so much that they have to get off their chest and that they're working through, and it's urgent. So these one-on-one coaching opportunities really are an opportunity for families to be heard, be validated, figure out how to work through their own issues first before being a part of a bigger group where you want now resolution, right? But you can't get resolution if you're still fighting within yourself of past hurts, I guess, is the best way to, kind of broaden that topic. But yeah.
Absolutely. Great advice. All right. So again, I encourage you, if you have any other questions throughout the rest of the morning here, to put things in the Q&A. Right now, I think we don't have any exact questions for you, Holly, from the group. So we'll move on. I think we'll just roll right into Zach. He's ready. But thank you, Holly, for joining us. And you're going to stick around for the roundtable right after? Okay. So she'll be back.
Yep.
She'll be back with us. Great. So we're going to roll on to Zach, and I encourage you, while you have this on, Zach doesn't mind if you get up and go grab your lunch, so that you can keep hydrated and nutrition going and your energy level up. And we're going to talk a little bit about nutrition, brain health from Zach. He joined us last time with some great information. And then as soon as Zach is done, we're just going to roll right into that round table with the experts. And we might wrap up a little bit early, which would be great. It's a beautiful day out here, at least in Minnesota. So thank you for staying with us. And so I encourage you to stay on and dig deep for those questions that you might want to ask the experts. Go ahead and start putting them in the Q&A. Otherwise, we'll have some discussion that might be interesting to you during that round table without the questions. But we would love to have your questions. So go ahead, Zach.
Okay. Thank you, Melanie. Okay, everybody. So I actually will be right back. I left my nice little notepad in the other room we were stretching in. So actually, never mind. I found it right here. Sorry. Got a little chaotic for a second there. I was looking at the wrong notebook. Okay, so now what we're going to talk about is breathing. Okay, and we're talking about why deep breathing is so important, but just in general, why breathing is important. And I know that sounds kind of funny, right? Because the concept seems kind of simple. Well, like, of course I have to breathe, right? It's something that I don't even have to think about. But, you know, in context of day-to-day life, yes, breathing is something that is sort of automatic, right? We just kind of breathe on our own. But conscious breathing, right? Breathing that has an awareness, right? That's kind of a whole different ball game. And you know, when we start talking about conscious breathing or awareness, right, of our breath, you know, that's when we start to tie in different aspects of our health. You know, like I said, obviously we have to breathe, right? We need oxygen, but we, you know, becoming aware of the breath has a lot of benefits for us in our day-to-day living. And whether that's calming the body, calming the mind, or just bringing a sense of ease, easing tension, you know, whatever it might be. And so talking about, you know, why this deep breathing is so important. So we'll go over that a little bit. And then a little bit here, I'm going to talk about mainly two breathing exercises. One that is centered around purely just the breath and some light counting to focus. And then the second breathing exercise that we're going to talk about is going to get the body a bit more involved. So obviously, as we breathe, the body is involved, right? But sort of actively adding some motions with the body to sort of enhance that deep breathing exercise, okay? So first of all, why is it important, right? What are the big things about that conscious breathing, that awareness of the breath, okay? Well, I think the first thing to talk about, the benefits of, you know, talking about conscious breathing, you know, and that falls on the lines of meditation, you know, maybe deep breathing exercises, relaxation techniques, but, you know, what all these sort of different things that maybe you've heard about, you know, things like yoga, they focus on the breath quite a bit. Really in a well done strength training, or for that matter, Parkinson's exercise class, there should be a lot of focus on the breath, okay? And so first and foremost, what does that do when we say, okay, take a breath? Well, when I bring awareness to it, I start to pay attention to the breath within my body, right, within me. Well, why that's important? Because it sort of takes us out of the, you know, what happened yesterday, what's going to happen, you know, in an hour from now, you know, the next thing that I have to do, whatever it might be. And it kind of brings us right into the present moment, okay? And that's one of the things that we hear a lot about with meditation is it's a time, you know, 10, 15 minutes where we try to focus on being present, okay? So how does deep breathing, being present, how is that going to be beneficial for, say, my Parkinson's, okay, or symptoms of Parkinson's, all right? Or really, let's just, even without talking about PD, let's talk about how that's beneficial just for your day-to-day life in general, okay? So, you know, it's very easy when we get caught in momentum of thinking, of getting ahead of ourselves and thinking about, you know, things that we have to do and stuff like that. And whether we realize it or not, when we are thinking kind of out of our current task, you know, it can be slightly stressful. And it might not seem or feel very stressful because we're really used to it, but when we're constantly thinking ahead, the brain is sort of working, it's planning and it's plotting, right? Okay, here's what I'm going to have for lunch. Okay, after lunch, then I'm going to have this. So let's say you're listening to this seminar right now and you're hearing me blab on about the breath, right? Maybe you're thinking like, oh, I've got family coming over at 3 today, so I got to do this and I got to clean the kitchen, and then we're having dinner here, so I got to make sure that I set the meat out and I make sure I cut up all the veggies. And so you're thinking ahead, right? And in that time frame of thinking ahead, your brain is working, okay? And I say stress can be good or bad. It's that term is oftentimes coined as a bad thing, but exercise is stress, right? And we all know exercise is beneficial. So thinking ahead is a form of stress on the brain, right? Even thinking in the past is a form of stress on the brain, especially because thinking about things that already taken place that we can't change, right? Unless it's reflective thinking, of course, then that's another case altogether. But thinking about the breath, thinking ahead, sorry about that. But when our minds are sort of in the future, it's stressful, right? And we kind of got it, things are running, right? That wheel is turning. And what happens is we sort of disconnect ourselves a little bit from the body. Now we're really focused on up in our heads. And so we're thinking about all these different things, and we sort of get detached from our body. And oftentimes, if you're, way ahead and you're focused on things to come for the day, or, you know that you're going to be going to the store, and maybe there's some fear, there's some nervousness about, I get nervous when I go to the store because I'm worried I'll freeze. I'm worried I'll have a fall, right? Anything along those lines. Well, that fear, that stress, that thinking ahead, that builds, okay? And that is creating a stress response in the body, okay? What happens when we start to feel this stress response, when we start to sort of get ahead of ourselves a little bit, right? We kind of start to do this, right? Maybe the shoulders come up into the ears, or maybe our hands get tight, or maybe our legs, right? We start to carry tension through our legs, our neck, our mid-back, wherever it might be, but we become tense, okay? When we are tense, when the body is kind of, squeezing like this, even if we're not aware of it, right? A lot of us walk around hiked up like this until someone says, hey, check your shoulders, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, I was really hiked up, okay? When we become tense like that, the body becomes stiff, right? And we become a bit more rigid. We become less fluid because, the shoulders are hiking up, or my legs are tight, and we're already dealing with being fairly rigid, right? Obviously, rigidity being one of those many symptoms of PD. And so sort of stressing and thinking ahead, or thinking in the past, right? Things out of our current level of control, out of our present moment, to circle back around, can be sort of the little stressors, right? And there's nothing wrong with that output, right? We're thinking, we're planning ahead, we're getting ready for the day. That output is okay, but if we don't take time to have the input, the conscious breathing, the ability to stop and bring ourselves into the now, right? Our bodies and our minds never really get a break. And, we sort of, not to get philosophical, but we kind of live in a momentum-based society. From the moment we wake up, we slam that coffee and away we go, and our day is just rolling, right? And then by the end of the day, it's like, man, I'm tired, my neck, and da-da-da. And it's like, well, our bodies, once it got up, right, got hiked, became tense, got into that output mode, which isn't a bad thing, right? But once we got into output mode, we never got out of it. Okay. Now, if we're someone who's dealing with a chronic condition like Parkinson's, or really any chronic condition, the body is kind of already in an upped, stressed state, right? Your brain is not producing enough of what it needs for the brain and the body to have that, what we would consider, for lack of a better term, normal or sort of baseline healthy function. And we're already in that stress state. Now add in being out of the current moment, add other stressors day to day, right? That can exacerbate symptoms. And not only just the physical symptoms, but now we start talking about the anxiety, the depression, some of the mental health that comes along with PD. And you can see how quickly things can kind of spiral, circle out of control. And so the breath, right, is a way to put the stop sign up, right? Put the brakes to all of that, and then just allow the body to reset, okay? And it's resetting. That's really what we want. We want to be able to reset. And in the reset, what do we look for? I look for muscle tension to ease, right? Because I'm taking a focused breath, I'm probably going to have a deeper breath, right? I'm going to breathe in a bit more. So my body is receiving more oxygen, which, you know, and the most basic explanation, more oxygen, obviously great for our tissues, transporting more nutrients around our body. Very, very beneficial, okay? Not to mention that with breathing, you can see how my chest expands and contracts, right? Now I'm working those muscles that are involved in breathing, okay? And again, when we get tight, the breathing gets short. So breathing is another way to open up the body to combat some of these symptoms of Parkinson's. In fact, kind of that shortened breath is something that I have seen in a lot of my Parkinson's clients. And why, when we talk about like some of the voice activation exercises where we do like the long, you know, oh and ah, right? It's not just the benefit of using the voice, but we have to take a big breath to do that, right? So I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you out there, but again, to bring it all back around, breathing is like a messenger to the body, okay? When the body gets up and it gets tense, the breath becomes short, okay? And that's kind of stressful, right? If we're running away from something or someone scares us, we're not all calm and with these big deep breaths, right? We're tight, our breathing becomes short and choppy, okay? Kind of that stress breathing. We want to do the opposite. We want to throw out the stop sign and we want to take these nice deep breaths, okay? So the breathing activities that we're going to talk about today, there's two of them that I really like. The first one, you guys may have covered it before, but it's called box breathing, okay? And it's a very, very simple form of breathing. Why I like it is twofold. Is one, I'm getting a nice, obviously a nice full breath. I'm getting a pause. Some people will call this like breathing for like the vagus nerve, right? Or breathing for like sort of that rest and digest mode, sort of that relaxed, calm state. But I like it because you get the deep breath, there's a hold, there's an exhale, and there's a hold again, okay? So if we don't focus on the breathing, very quickly, we'll get our rhythm, okay? So I like this style of breathing because it's a light focus, but it's enough to grab our attention to bring us into right now versus, you know, like if I'm just focusing on my breathing, I could be taking, you know, big breaths, but I might be, you know, at the supermarket, you know what I mean? Or I might be, you know, in traffic thinking about my drive that I got to take in an hour here instead. So I like the box breathing because it is, again, brings us into that moment, kind of that present time where we're throwing up the stop sign and signaling to the brain that everything's okay, that we're going to be nice and calm here and we're going to reset our bodies. So how box breathing works, you can pick any number you would like. I personally, and most people I've worked with, really like a 4 count. It seems to be an easy enough number to focus on. But how it works is I'm going to inhale for a count of 4, and then I hold my breath for a count of 4. So we breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4. We hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. So hence the name box breathing. There's the inhale for 4, the hold for 4, exhale for 4, and hold for 4, okay? And then we just repeat that cycle over and over again, okay? Now, when holding the breath, don't force it. Don't like and do a bunch of squeezing and that Valsalva maneuver that we talked about during the stretching session, okay? That's not something we want to do. It's a light hold, okay? Breathing in, and I'm just allowing the breath to stay in the body. You'll feel some light tension through the chest, but we don't want to squeeze, right? And to be pushing the breath and straining our bodies in any way, okay? So to note, one thing, in the inhale, you'll feel the body expanding, right? Rising up, okay? You feel the hold. So now we're kind of holding that tension, right? Hold, 2, 3, 4. On the exhale, that's when you see the shoulders come down, the ribs sink back down, the body lets go. And then we're going to hold that relaxation for 4. So again, in for 4, hold the tension. Out for 4, hold the relaxation, okay? And again, this sort of wave breathing, this kind of rhythmic breathing is what helps to really bring us down. So we're just going to take a minute here, and I'm going to run you guys through a couple rounds of the breathing, all righty? So let's get ourselves set first, get ourselves in a good state. So before we even start, I want everyone to take a nice big breath in and out. Good. We're going to breathe in and out. One more time, breathing in and out. Very good. Okay, now, if you're at home following along, I would like you to close your eyes. Continue to breathe nice and deeply in and out, in the nose, out the mouth. And when I say go, I'm going to start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. And in the counting, we're going to start with the inhale. So I'll say in, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we hold our breath. So I'll say hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then I'll say out, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then, of course, hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then it's back to the in. Okay? So here we go. A couple nice deep breaths on your own here. Get yourself in that nice relaxed state. Be comfortable in your chair. Okay, and here we go. In, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. Out, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. In, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. Out, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. And in, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. Out, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. In, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 1, 2, 3, 4. Out, 1, 2, 3, 4. And hold, 2, 3, 4. Good. Everyone take a nice big breath in. Exhale out. Before we move on, just take a moment and now just notice how your body feels. Maybe there's less tension in the shoulders, the legs, the hips, the feet, the hands. Maybe the mind is a bit calmer. Maybe we felt our energy level off a little bit here. And we might not have, right? We might feel maybe a little bit more up yet. Maybe we didn't feel those changes, and that's okay too. The important thing is to just notice how you're feeling after the breathing. Make note of it, and then let it go. Good. Okay. So that's the box breathing technique. And again, simple as could be: in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4, okay? You know, I would say start off with 5 minutes of this style of breathing, work your way up into that 10, 15-minute mark. I think 10 to 15 minutes is right around where you're going to start to really feel the benefits. If you do get to a point where you can really build up, I really like that 20-minute mark, you know, for some of these deep breathing techniques. I think about 20 minutes in is when the body really starts to let go and really starts to reach kind of that place of being calm. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that we can't use these breathing techniques as anchors in our day-to-day life, right? We start to experience anxiety, we become a bit stressed or worried, whatever it might be. I can do a quick 4 breath, right? I can do some box breathing, you know, even just 1 breath to anchor myself, right? Pulling it back in. We start to get here, right? We kind of like start looking outward, or we get caught up in here, and we do that box breathing, and we bring it back to the body, okay? Now, the second deep breathing exercise that I like to do, it involves the body just a little bit more, okay? So I'm actually going to turn this a little bit here so you guys can see my upper body. Okay, so with this exercise, again, as I mentioned with the breathing, you know, watch my body when I breathe here. When I inhale, right, you can see the rib cage expands, kind of rising up here. My shoulders move back a little bit, and then when I exhale, you see how everything kind of closes down. So inhale, we are literally opening up, right? Exhale, we are closing off here. We're closing down, okay? And so both are important, right? We don't want to be caught in the exhaled state where we're taking these kind of short breaths, and we certainly don't want to be caught open wide in the inhale state, right? Some people will, you know, when discussing mental health, they'll talk about the differences in posture, right? And then this isn't related or any way diagnosing or anything like that, right? But we talk about people with, you know, maybe with depression or anxiety, kind of this hiding, this folding, right? Kind of stuck on the out breath, right? And then we talk about someone maybe when we get in these high stress, more manic states, kind of here, right? It's big expression, kind of stuck on the in state, right? Sort of the up state, so to speak. So again, breathing is that sort of yin yang of, you know, the in and the out, right? And so again, incorporating the body with that breathing is very important. So what I really, for this exercise, I like to start with my arms out, palms facing the ground, okay? So what I'm thinking about doing, because as I'm inhaling, right, I have muscles that are sort of tensing to bring that rib cage, right, to help me to fill those lungs. So I'm going to continue with that tension. So you're going to see my hands open wide here. I'm going to inhale, and I pull those arms back, okay? And you can see how my body has expanded nice and big now, and I'm squeezing those hands, okay? So now I have tension through my body. On the exhale, I'm pushing and letting the tension go, okay? So I'm inhaling, allowing that tension to exist to help me to breathe, exhaling, and I let the tension go. I inhale, tension, exhale, I let the tension go. Now, this inhale, exhale, right? Any of you guys doing some Parkinson's fitness classes or working with a PT instructor, I hope that they are involving the breath as much as they can with your exercises. When I think about a power up, I inhale, exhale, or excuse me, reverse that. So I start with an inhale, exhale, in, exhale. Okay, so I like to involve those movements with the breathing as much as I can. Now, when we're in those high-paced, fast classes, you know, a little bit more difficult to do, but for those slower movements, the stretching, try to incorporate the breath just like we are now, sort of that pushing and pulling, okay? Now, let's do a couple of these big breaths together here. So let's take the arms out And here we go. Breathe in with me. Squeeze the hands. Exhale. So while doing those nice deep breaths, we can keep the focus just on the breathing. I know some people maybe like to throw a little, like a mantra, right? Something to aid in the focus or aid in the relaxation. So one that I, personally like is, I'll think, sort of inhaling positive energy, right? Exhaling sort of negative energy, or, positive thinking in and then negative thinking out, right? And again, just a mindfulness exercise, a relaxation technique. We can think tension in, tension out, okay? But sometimes having a nice little mantra to follow, right? And also sort of to help set your mindset with the exercise, I personally think can be very beneficial as well, okay? So with that being said, those are the two main sort of deep breathing exercises that I wanted to go over with you guys today. Just looking through my notes here, I think I've covered pretty much everything that I would like to talk about. We do have a few minutes left here. So if there are any questions at all, I'm obviously willing to answer them at this time.
Video down here. Thank you, Zach. I'm going to have you stay on at the moment. We don't have any questions, but I know I have like the tingles from breathing with you. It helps my whole body calm down and relax. So hopefully those at home, as well as maybe our panelists, were also breathing along and can utilize that. So Zach, a question, a lot of times people want some guidance on things like this because they forget how to do it or what to do, or are there any good resources out there to help with meditation that you can recommend that people find?
Yeah, so for those of you that maybe are a bit more tech savvy, or maybe you have some grandchildren or some family that could assist, there's an app called the Calm app, C-A-L-M. I've talked to a few clients that really like the Calm app because it's has a lot of guided meditation on there that people have a tendency to really enjoy. Why guided meditation? Because it's like anything, when we first start off, like your first day playing baseball, you're not hitting home runs and throwing people out from center field, right? You have to build the skills. Deep breathing, meditation, this type of mindful focus, it's a skill that we have to really consistently work on to build. So having a teacher, having someone to guide you through to help kind of pull you back into focus is really important. So I think the Calm app is a really good one. One that I personally have used in the past, Headspace. Those of you that have Netflix, Headspace actually has a couple meditations that you can follow along with now, right on the Netflix app or wherever you have that at on your TV or on your phone. So those are two pretty good resources. I believe there is some resources on the Parkinson's Foundation website in regards to some meditation and deep breathing. I think I found some of those on the Parkinson's Foundation website. I have to double check. But another really good place to look, in your area, if you can find some, local yoga instructors. Many yoga instructors are very well educated on deep breathing. Not only that, but different poses for all different levels to help to release maybe some of these tension areas in our body. And so I think finding a local yoga instructor and that would maybe be willing to offer you a couple sessions on deep breathing to get you started. Things that you can do at home for yourself would be, again, breathing where there's a count, okay? If we're like, I don't want to do the app, or I don't really want to find someone to instruct me, how can I kind of do this on my own? I would suggest, any breathing that has like a form of counting or some type of anchoring, right? Counting is really just another way to anchor us into the present moment. Some, breathing, they'll talk about focusing on the chest, the belly, your hands, your shoulders, but try to, when you do your deep breathing techniques, find a way to anchor yourself, okay? And you're going to notice your thoughts will drift. And the thing that I have seen with a lot of people, or what has frustrated myself, is people will say, "Oh, I'm no good at meditation. I'm no good at deep breathing. I lose my focus." And I'm just like, well, that's the point, right? We want to be, we want to improve our focus with these exercises. And so it's okay that your thoughts are going to drift and wander. In fact, in a 10-minute deep breathing session, you'll probably be focused on your breath maybe 30% of the time. Okay, if you're really good, beginner's luck, maybe half the time you're focused on the breath. Your thoughts are going to drift all over the place, and that's okay, right? The key is every time you can remind yourself to bring it back to deep breathing, back to whatever anchor. It could be the box breathing. You could be inhaling and counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then repeating that cycle, right? But every time you bring yourself back to the breath and whatever anchor you choose, that's a win, right? That's like points. That's money in the bank. And then inevitably your thoughts will drift again. And then you bring it back and there's points again. And then all of a sudden in a couple of weeks, really even after the first couple, like 2 weeks, you're going to go, "Oh, I'm bringing it back sooner than I was beforehand," right? And so then that's where we see the progression with the focus. And I guess some parting advice that I would have is don't think of deep breathing and these different techniques that we talked about as like a thing you have to schedule and do, right? I think it's important to make part of your routine, absolutely. But remember, the reason why we stop, right? Stop and we reset is because we want to be present and we want that nice calm breathing throughout the entire day. Okay, so we might meditate in the morning and then not have another thought about our breath the rest of the day till the next morning when we do it again, right? But why we're doing it in the first place is because I want to be able to have that ability to pull myself back into the moment as I go about my day. And so the deep breathing starts in the morning, but the mindset continues all day long. So little things that you could do throughout the day, you could write notes, put them on your fridge, right? Put them on your mirror in the window, take a breath. Some people will use reminders on their phone, whatever it might be. I know some of you have medication where you have a timer to take your medication. Boy, what a great time to take a breath. The timer goes off. Oh, I'm going to take a deep breath, and then I'm going to take my medication. And in fact, if we had the time, we could then talk about tiny habits and how we are anchoring a small habit onto an already built-in habit, but that's for another seminar, of course. But yes, the mindset of we'd start this breathing in the morning, but it's the mindset of all day trying to bring myself back into the present moment.
Excellent. Wonderful. Well, that's a good launch into our experts are available to chat. And so Annie's going to allow our attendees to talk and mute and unmute themselves. And if our panelists can come on and show your video and your face, that always helps too. And mute and unmute as you can. And we welcome our attendees to stay on for a little bit. And if you are, the other thing you can use is the raise hand feature. If you're afraid you might interrupt someone else from talking, you can, on the bottom of your screen in Zoom, there's a little raise hand. If you click on that, it'll tell us that you want to talk, and then we'll call on you. And so hopefully you notice that now you can mute and unmute yourself. And we'll just get started. Is there any questions right away? And if not, I think that's a really great thing to launch. I think Dr. Fields joined us again, and with meditation, and that kind of, generally it's a little hard to convince people about the importance of meditation and to make time for that. And how could that help with a little bit more detail about cognitive health and brain health and meditation?
It really is so important. I think, especially in terms of Parkinson's, as I talked about and others have noted also, attention is so important in cognition, and doing meditation and things like that teach you to focus your attention, and some of the cognitive training exercises too really are centered around focused attention. And so I think meditation is just, a really great way, to accomplish that. And, I think some of the studies that, I talked about earlier showed that it can actually, there can be cortical changes, changes in your brain that, go along with meditation practices.
Absolutely wonderful. So another question that I thought if there was anyone else want to chime in on their particular area of expertise on local resources. So Dr. Tipton and Dr. Fields in particular, we didn't have a chance to talk about that. Not all of our participants or people watching this video after the fact are from Minnesota or from Rochester. And so are there any tips on the best ways to find resources for the cognitive health, the psychology, the program that you in particular spoke of, Dr. Fields, and any tips on that? I know people always really are looking for cost-effective ways to access this, or even medical ways to access this. So any tips on that?
Yeah, so the program that I was involved with was the HABIT program. It was called HABIT, Healthy Activities to Benefit Independence and Thinking. And there are 3 major sites, Arizona and Florida have at the Mayo sites are running the programs. Also in La Crosse, Wisconsin, I think is the Rochester site right now. But they have, over the years, they have trained other sites nationally to do this program. So I think at Cleveland Clinic, I think there's one in California now. But if you want to more information about that, if you go to mayoclinic.org under psychiatry and psychology, and it'll give the option, and you can learn about the HABIT program. So it talks about all of the what the benefits and the components and pretty much what I described. And it also gives there's a YouTube video, so you can hear people that actually have gone through the program. And then there's an email address where you can contact the main HABIT providers, and they will connect you with somebody, or resources that will help access that.
I would also say that, having a discussion with your physician about some of these issues can be really important, especially if you're not local to the Rochester area, to learn about local resources. Also, I don't know that it was touched on today, but in addition to speaking with your physician about these issues, palliative care can also be incredibly beneficial to help have and facilitate some of these roundtable discussions, family discussions as well, and put it into context of your medical health, because a palliative specialist is going to be a medically trained physician as well. So they can kind of put it all into context and maybe make some recommendations with that regard. And I'll just echo again what I said earlier about the American Parkinson's Disease Association, APDA. You can go to their website online. I believe it's apda.org. And they can also kind of point you in the right direction for local resources.
Wonderful, that's excellent. We have a question. Do you have any suggestions for computer apps that help with cognition for someone with the beginning stages of dementia?
The program that we used is called Brain HQ. And the field of view test, actually, there have been studies, large-scale studies, looking at the delay of dementia using the field of view test that's within that Brain HQ app. But really, but I do believe There is a charge for that now. There didn't used to be, but I think there's a small, subscription fee. Trying to think of the other one that's pretty commonly used, but really any
Dr.
that
Field,
folks, yeah.
do any of your patients use luminosity? Do they
That's
find that
it.
helpful?
It's Lumosity is the one. That was the alternate one. Thank you. That's what I was trying to think of. That's a really good one too. So I would say Brain HQ or Lumosity. But I think the important thing is it's that it's an application that, any application that is cognitively challenging and stimulating. So if you get too comfortable with it, it starts to lose its effectiveness. You got to really change it up and challenge yourself. And so those, the ones that rely on processing speed and attention are really the best ones. So, but again, yeah, Lumosity is good, and Brain HQ are I think the only ones that really have some research behind them.
Great. I know in one of our previous series workshops, we heard from Maria Service, an occupational therapist, and she talked a lot about things that aren't necessarily computerized these days. So crosswords, Sudoku, coloring pages, those are all things that can help fire the brain.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. I'll pause for a moment if anyone wanted to unmute and ask a question. Quiet group. So we a couple other questions that might stimulate some conversation. So we've heard in past seminars, and kind of to bring that around, maybe some of the experts here, is sometimes caregivers can get frustrated and they really want to help, but the individual with Parkinson's disease seems to have a lack of motivation, and that can cause some frustration. And so I just thought maybe to come back around that just a little bit and talk about, we've heard about the importance of social activities. We've heard about the importance of exercise. We've heard about the importance of talking about what's going on. All of those can seem to be not things that an individual with Parkinson's disease, especially later stages, just aren't interested in. And can you talk a little bit about what's going on cognitively that, it might not be necessarily their previous state of being that would have done that, but it might be some about Parkinson's disease and how to adjust that?
I would say apathy is really key, and it's very common in Parkinson's disease. And it's hard to get people motivated. I would let Dr. Tipton talk about maybe the pharmacologic aspects of it, but in terms of behavior, and it's helpful not to ask people to do things or say you should do something. It's more helpful to say, let's go do something, to sort of, enjoin them in your activity, and things that they like to do and they would do, or would have done previously, but now are not so motivated, just to kind of, just start doing them and say, I would love it if you could, come with me and help me, or we could take a walk, or let's, again, it is very challenging, to get somebody motivated, but you just have to try little tricks. But it's just better to be, not demanding, not expecting, but more, working as a team rather than, somebody who comes off as, I'm a care provider.
I think those are excellent points. And I would say from the medication standpoint, a couple of considerations. One are things that I already mentioned earlier today, is making sure that the Parkinson's disease targeted medications like levodopa are optimal. And it's somewhat of a moving target. We're not at the point right now where it's like chess and you're predicting, a few moves ahead. It's really more like checkers. We're seeing how your symptoms are progressing, and then we respond accordingly with changes in the dosing of the levodopa. But also considering other medications that may be used for, say, anxiety or depression, both of which are very common in Parkinson's disease, making sure that those medications, sometimes people need an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication. So making sure that that's addressed in parallel with, say, your levodopa for the disease is really important. And the last piece, I think I said 2 things, but 3 things, always assessing every medication you're putting in your body, because so many medications that we may or may not be aware of can adversely affect cognition, cloud the thinking. Sleep aids are a big one. It's sort of low-hanging fruit for this conversation. So considering things like Benadryl, Benadryl may help you get to sleep. And, Joe Smith looks at you from across the room and yeah, they're asleep, but it interferes with the normal sleep architecture. So the type of sleep that you're getting is actually not the restful, restorative sleep that you need to be getting. Furthermore, because of that, it actually can exacerbate the disease moving forward. There are different stages of our sleep that we have to spend a particular amount of time in every night. And we're understanding more and more about why that is. And one thing that we've learned is that in stage 3 sleep in particular, there's a system, it's kind of like our lymphatic system in the rest of our body, but kind of the lymphatic system of the brain opens up. And it's sort of a highway for getting rid of waste and garbage, such as abnormally accumulated proteins, which is one of the big things that causes, which is the thing that causes these diseases. So we don't want to do anything that interferes with sleep. So it's important to have a really thoughtful discussion with your neurologist about what medications can help and what medications can hurt.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, I do think that we forget how important sleep is. And I know I hear even from friends and family about that they can't sleep even in their younger years. And I think, the things that might come about later in life because of that, it's hard to know. That's a really good point. We have a question from the audience that this person has freezing spells. And what can I do to safely move again, is their question. I know Dr. Bentley's not on anymore, but I too am a physical therapist and will help answer this and start the conversation. So, throughout the workshop series, we have talked a little bit about freezing and how that can be a component definitely of the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. It also can be a sign that maybe your medications aren't quite right. So, Dr. Tipton will shake his head to that. So, that's one of those things. But sometimes even medications, especially with the waxing and waning of the medication during the day, the freezing can be a significant barrier to significant symptom that impacts you. And again, might make it so that you don't want to go out and you don't want to be in social activities and you might be afraid of falling. I do strongly recommend that this is a great reason to be in a supported exercise program and integral closely with a physical therapist, as well as integral with your physician. So that team is so important for individuals that have freezing, because the exercise classes, the evidence-based classes, the interventions like maybe the laser that Dr. Bentley talked about for walking on a walker, those are all things you want to try and see if it helps. There's also things that we can do during physical therapy on a treadmill, a supported treadmill, to help with that freezing, give you tips on ways that you can get yourself out of freezing. And so if you are having freezing and have never had that kind of guidance, please do, because it's something that is difficult to navigate on your own. So make sure those medications are up to snuff. And then the exercise programs, the aerobic exercise that Dr. Tipton talked about, the high-speed cycling, we see freezing get significantly less when individuals get their 150 minutes of aerobic exercise, when they participate in a power class, when they do the high-speed biking on the med bike, the freezing gets better. So it's going to take that to improve it and work on it slowly.
Melanie, I would add on to that when you're discussing freezing of gait with your provider, before you go in, try to think in your mind's eye does the freezing of gait seem to respond to my dosing of medication? Because there's sort of the way that we kind of parse out freezing of gait is whether or not it is levodopa responsive. Because if it is, then it's a very different treatment approach than if it's not. And freezing of gait is still one of those sort of black boxes that we're trying to understand better. But if it is levodopa responsive, again, that's a very different approach. Freezing of gait is, it's a fascinating entity because there's so much that we don't understand about it. But it really seems to be an issue with it's kind of taking the bradykinesia, or the slowness of movement that's so common in Parkinson's disease, to the extreme. So we would call it akinesia, or lack of movement. And it interrupts your walking at times when you would least expect it. But looking for things that may provoke it can help prevent you from falling. So some of the more common scenarios would be if you're walking over a threshold, or if you're in tight spots, or if you're walking, through a door threshold, those types of things, or turning, starting or stopping even can provoke a freezing episode. So being on the lookout for those, it can be helpful in preventing a fall. And one of the really interesting things about freezing of gait is that it's that issue of sort of turning the key, ignition, or the car sort of turns off unexpectedly. And in Parkinson's disease, our motor programs, if you think about a computer program, if you want to, open up your email, you click a button and the email opens up, or if you want to close something out, you just click a button and all this stuff happens. The motor programs in Parkinson's disease, by and large, are maintained. They're there. It's just an issue of accessing them. And that's where, I talked earlier about the substantia nigra and the basal ganglia, how that structure is important for accessing those motor programs that are there. And so ways that we can sort of jumpstart the system are with these external cues, like the U-step that Rio talked about earlier, a visual cue, that laser line that's in front of you. Auditory cueing can be helpful as well. I think some of the U-steps even have a metronome built in on them. I have patients that sometimes I have a patient that carries a tennis ball in his pocket, and he knows that if he freezes, he can toss the tennis ball and catch it on the bounce, and that unlocks his freezing of gait. So finding little strategies like that can really give you a lot of mileage. So I would look out for things like that, because you can really make a pretty significant difference.
Wonderful, thank you. Any of our panelists, anything, whether you just participated today or throughout the series, is there anything that you think would be advantageous to elaborate on at this point?
Melanie, I just want to make a comment kind of overall with the focus of today's seminar being on emotional health. I think anything that we can do to help us feel that we have choices, right? There's a lot of stuff that we're dealing with as care partners, as the person who's been diagnosed with the disease, that may feel very out of our control. So being able to find little ways, whether it's the deep breathing that got talked about earlier, Dr. Tipton's idea about, the tennis ball in the pocket, anything that can help us feel like we are in control, I guess, is one way of doing it. Is very empowering. And for our emotional and mental well-being, we want to feel like we do have choices, and that we do have things that we can use when we're feeling overwhelmed and when we're feeling that things aren't going our way. And so the emotional component of having choices and having people around us that are supportive, in terms of, we're just going to have some really bad days, right? But in the midst of those bad days, what can we do to lift the spirit within ourselves to get through that rough day and try again tomorrow, in hopes that we have better moments, maybe of more control or more ability to continue having the best life possible, which was really about our series, enriching our life, even though we may be living with a health condition that can feel very overpowering and all consuming at times. So I just think today's seminar has been amazing, and I just hope that people walk away with this feeling like they still do have choices and they still have the ability to focus on the good and to overcome the things that are challenging, and just keep a positive mindset.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Holly. Yeah, so I completely agree with you. And I think we'll maybe close with thanking everyone for participating and all of the participants, those that will be watching it later as well. And just a reminder about resources. And so that there's always somebody out there that can help. And it might not be in your town right available, but in the world of the internet, we're all close, we're all friends. And so reach out to any one of us, search for somebody local or in the city that's closest to you. There is a lot of nonprofits that work in this area, a lot of medical centers, specialized neurodegenerative centers are really important to have some kind of contact with. And those are usually only available in larger towns. We're lucky here in Rochester, being a medium-sized city, to have that, but they're all over. And so reach out, connect with a local medical fitness facility if you haven't, if you're having trouble at the community level, if you're having issues with caregiver support and struggles, reach out to your local caregiver coach, reach out to your psychologist, neurodegenerative psychologist. There's so many resources out there, so you are not alone. And there are a lot of choices, and we're all here to make your life healthier and happier. We want you all to be well. And so, yeah, any other closing remarks? I think we'll wrap up. All right. So thank you all for participating. I hope you enjoyed this series. Remember, it's available if you want to share it with friends on ExercisAbilities.org's website. We'll be sending out a survey, so please do fill that out, and enjoy a sunny day. Thank you.
Thank you.